The Philadelphia summer of 1876 had been merciless, but nothing compared to the suffocating heat trapped inside the rattling stagecoach barreling west through territories Elena Whitmore had only seen in newspaper sketches, always accompanied by stories of massacres, disease, and women who'd lost their minds to loneliness. She pressed her face against the window gap, desperate for air that didn't taste like another passenger's sweat. Across from her sat a whiskey drummer with tobacco-stained teeth who'd been staring at her ankles for 3 days straight. Beside him, a preacher's wife clutched a Bible with white knuckles, lips moving in silent prayer that grew more frantic with each mile deeper into the frontier. Elena understood the fear. She felt it herself, coiled tight in her chest like a snake preparing to strike. 3 months ago, she'd been planning a wedding to Edmund Fairchild, a banker's son with soft hands and softer ambitions. Her biggest concern had been whether the imported lace would arrive from France in time for the ceremony. Her father had smiled at her over breakfast, promised her a future of comfort and security, told her she'd never want for anything. Then he'd collapsed face first into his eggs. The physician called it a heart seizure. The creditors called it convenient timing. Within a week, Elena discovered the truth her father had hidden behind expensive wallpaper and her mother's pearl necklace. They were drowning in debt. The house, the furniture, her dowry. All of it belonged to men whose names she'd never heard, whose signatures covered documents her father had signed in desperation. Edmund had withdrawn his proposal before her father's body was cold. Turns out soft hands weren't interested in poverty. The estate sale had been humiliating, watching strangers paw through her mother's things, haggling over the price of memories. She'd kept one photograph, her parents on their wedding day, young and foolish enough to believe love conquered anything. She'd sold it 2 weeks later for train fare. The teaching position in Red Hollow had seemed like salvation when she'd read the advertisement. School teacher needed, room and board provided, frontier territory, strong constitution required. She'd written back immediately, lying about her experience, her strength, her certainty that she could survive anything. Now, staring at the barren landscape rolling past, all dust and dead grass and rocks that looked like broken teeth, she wondered if she'd simply chosen a slower method of dying. How much longer? The question came from a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who'd introduced himself as a land surveyor. He'd barely spoken since they'd left the last way station, just stared at his hands like they held answers. The driver's voice filtered down through the roof. Hour, maybe 2, depends on whether the creek's flooded. And if it is? The drummer asked. Then we're camping under the stars, friend. The preacher's wife whimpered. Elena didn't blame her. They'd passed 2 graves that morning, marked with crude crosses and stones. The driver hadn't slowed down. The afternoon heat made thinking difficult. Elena's dress, already the plainest thing she'd owned back east, clung to her skin. She'd removed her gloves hours ago, propriety be damned. Out here, no one cared if she showed her wrists. Out here, different rules applied. She was learning them too slowly. The bullet shattered the window beside her head. Glass exploded inward. Elena threw herself sideways, hitting the floor as the drummer shouted and the preacher's wife started screaming. More shots, rapid, overlapping, coming from multiple directions. The coach lurched violently as the horses panicked. "Bandits!" the driver yelled. "Get down! Everyone!" His words cut off with a wet, choking sound. The coach tilted dangerously. Elena braced herself against the seat, heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Through the broken window, she glimpsed riders, 4, maybe 5, closing in with weapons drawn. Their faces were covered with bandanas, their intent crystal clear. The surveyor was crying. The drummer had pulled a tiny pistol from his jacket, hands shaking so badly Elena knew he'd never hit anything. The preacher's wife had gone silent, eyes rolled back, passed out cold. "Your money!" A voice outside, rough and confident. "All of it now, or we start shooting passengers." The coach had stopped moving. Elena could hear the horses stamping, their panic matching her own. She pressed herself flatter against the floor, splinters digging into her palms. Her reticule held $15, everything she had left in the world. Without it, she'd starve before reaching Red Hollow. She reached for the small bag anyway. Death seemed worse than poverty. I said, now. More gunfire, but different this time. Sharper, more precise, and coming from a different direction. One of the bandits screamed. A horse went down hard, throwing its rider. Elena lifted her head just enough to see through the window, and what she saw made no sense. A single rider had appeared from behind a rock formation, moving with the kind of controlled violence that belonged in nightmares. He was tall, even mounted, she could tell, and dressed in dark clothes that seemed to swallow light. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she caught a glimpse of hard angles and a jaw that looked carved from stone. He wasn't shooting wildly. Each shot was deliberate, economical. One bandit fell, then another. The remaining outlaws returned fire, but the stranger moved like smoke, already somewhere else before their bullets arrived. His horse, a massive black beast, responded to commands Elena couldn't hear, positioning its rider for kill shots with disturbing precision. It was over in less than a minute. 4 bodies sprawled in the dust. The 5th bandit had spurred his horse into a desperate retreat, but the stranger's rifle cracked once more, and the outlaw tumbled from his saddle, rolling several times before lying still. Silence fell like a curtain. Elena stayed frozen on the floor, breath coming in short gasps. The drummer had dropped his useless pistol. The surveyor was still crying quietly. The preacher's wife remained unconscious, which seemed like mercy. Footsteps approached the coach. Heavy boots in dirt. Elena forced herself to look up as the door swung open. The man filled the doorway like a wall. Up close, he was more frightening than helpful. 6 feet of hard muscle and harder eyes, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. His clothes were dusty and worn, his gun belt sitting low on narrow hips, both revolvers still in his hands like extensions of his body. He looked at each passenger with the emotional investment of someone inspecting cattle. When his gaze landed on Elena, sprawled inelegantly on the floor with her skirts twisted around her legs, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or assessment. Anyone hurt? His voice matched everything else about him, rough, flat, brooking no nonsense. The drummer shook his head. The surveyor managed a strangled no. Elena pushed herself upright, trying to salvage some dignity. The driver? Dead. The man said it without inflection. Took a bullet to the throat. Probably didn't feel much. The casual delivery made Elena's stomach turn. Shouldn't we bury him? The stranger's mouth twitched, though calling it a smile would be generous. Sure. You want to dig, or should I? Heat rushed to Elena's face. I didn't mean... I'll handle it. He holstered his weapons with practiced ease. Rest of you stay in the coach. This territory isn't friendly to Eastern folk wandering around. He moved to close the door, but Elena found her voice. Wait. Who are you? He paused, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Colt Mercer, Sheriff of Red Hollow. The name meant nothing to her. Thank you for saving us. His eyes, gray, she realized, like winter sky, fixed on her again. Don't thank me yet, Miss Whitmore. She went cold. How do you know my name? Because I came looking for you. He glanced at the bodies cooling in the dirt, then back at her. This wasn't chance. I've been tracking this coach for 3 days. Elena's mouth went dry. I don't understand. You will. He started to turn away, then stopped. What was your father's name, full name? Thomas Whitmore. Confusion mixed with the first threads of real fear. Why? Colt Mercer's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Because Thomas Whitmore owed me $30,000, and the contract he signed says if he couldn't pay in cash, he'd pay with you. The words didn't make sense. Elena heard them, processed them individually, but together they formed something impossible. No, my father would never... Your father was desperate. Mercer's tone suggested he'd had this conversation before and found it tedious. Desperate men do desperate things. He came to me 2 years ago, needed money fast. His wife was dying, doctors weren't cheap. Elena's mother. The endless specialists, the treatments from Europe, the promises that one more procedure might save her. All of it had failed anyway. He borrowed from you? Her voice sounded strange, distant, among others, but I'm the one who made him sign a marriage contract, legal and binding, witnessed by a territorial judge. Mercer pulled a folded paper from his jacket, handed it through the door. Your father's signature. And yours, forged well enough that no court out here would question it. Elena stared at the document. Her father's handwriting, she'd know it anywhere. And beside it, her own name in a script that mimicked her style but wasn't quite right. This is insane. She thrust the paper back at him. You can't just... This isn't how marriage works. It is out here. Mercer's face might have been carved from the same rock formation surrounding them. Your father knew the terms. If he died before repaying the debt, you became collateral. You're 23, unmarried, and according to the contract, legally promised to me. The drummer made a strangled sound. The surveyor had stopped crying, now staring at Elena with horror and morbid fascination. Elena's laugh came out broken. So what, you're kidnapping me? Forcing me to marry you? Forcing. Mercer considered the word. No, you've got a choice. You can come with me to Red Hollow, marry me, and have a roof over your head and food in your belly. Or, he gestured at the empty landscape stretching in all directions. You can take your chances out here. It's a free country. That's not a choice. It's the only one you've got. He said it without cruelty, just stating facts. Your father's debts didn't die with him. You've got nothing, Miss Whitmore. No money, no family, no prospects. The teaching position in Red Hollow? His mouth twitched again. I made sure it was offered to you, made sure the salary was just enough to get you on that coach. The betrayal hit harder than the earlier gunfire. All of this was a trap? All of this was business. Mercer's eyes held no apology. Your father made a deal. I'm collecting. Elena wanted to scream, to rage, to throw the contract in his face and tell him to go to hell, but she was practical enough, barely, to see the truth in his words. She had $15, no connections, no skills that mattered out here. And judging by the bodies cooling in the dust, this land killed people who made mistakes. If I agree, the words tasted like poison. What exactly are you expecting? A wife. Simple, direct. Someone to manage a household. Cook, clean, the usual things. And at night? She forced herself to ask it, cheeks burning. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. I'm not in the habit of forcing women, Miss Whitmore. You'll share my name and my house. What happens beyond that depends on whether you ever decide you want me. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like another kind of trap, a long game she didn't understand yet. Elena looked at the drummer, the surveyor, the unconscious preacher's wife. None of them met her eyes. Of course not. This was her nightmare, not theirs. She looked back at Colt Mercer, this stranger who held her entire future in his scarred hands. How long do I have to decide? You don't. He nodded toward the sun, already sinking toward the horizon. We've got about 2 hours of daylight. I need to bury the driver, get these folks to Red Hollow, and get you settled. So you can come willing or you can come fighting, but either way, you're coming. The absolute certainty in his voice made something snap inside her. Elena stood up, ignoring her shaking legs, and stepped down from the coach. She was tall for a woman, but Mercer still had half a foot on her. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I'll marry you. Each word cost her. But understand this, Sheriff Mercer. I will hate you for it. Every day, every hour. You're buying my presence, not my affection, not my respect, and certainly not my forgiveness. For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. It might have been regret, or maybe just exhaustion. Fair enough. He turned away, already moving toward the driver's body. Grab your bag. We ride out in 30 minutes. Elena stood in the dust beside a stagecoach full of strangers, watching her future husband prepare to bury a dead man with the same efficiency he'd used to kill 5 others. The frontier wind picked up, carrying the smell of blood and gunpowder and something else, something wild and untamed that this land seemed made of. She thought of her mother's pearls sold for pennies, her father's lies catching up to destroy her, Edmund's polite rejection, his relief at dodging poverty. And now this, a forced marriage to a killer who'd orchestrated her arrival like a chess move. Elena reached into the coach for her bag, her fingers brushing the photograph of her parents she'd somehow kept through everything. Young, hopeful, believing love was enough. She wanted to tear it in half. Instead, she tucked it deeper into her bag and turned to watch Colt Mercer dig a grave in hard frontier soil, his movements economical and practiced. A man who'd clearly buried plenty of bodies before. Miss Whitmore? The surveyor had found his voice. You don't have to do this. We could, when we reach Red Hollow, we could find help. Someone must what? Elena didn't look at him. Challenge a territorial sheriff who just killed 5 men without breaking a sweat? Help a destitute Eastern woman with no skills and no prospects? Please. She said it flatly, stating facts, because facts were all she had left. The surveyor fell silent. Elena watched the sun sink lower, painting the rocks red and gold, beautiful and merciless. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound carried across the emptiness, wild and lonely. She'd come west looking for a fresh start. She'd found a prison with a ring attached. Mercer worked fast. The driver went into a shallow grave marked with stones and a crude cross made from broken coach timber. He spoke no words over the body, just filled in the dirt and moved on to checking the horses. The outlaws he left where they fell. What about them? Elena couldn't help asking. Buzzards have to eat too. Mercer was examining the coach's wheel, testing for damage. These men were wanted for rape and murder across 3 territories. They don't deserve Christian burial. The casual dismissal should have shocked her. Instead, Elena found herself nodding. Something about the frontier was already working on her, stripping away the useless parts of civilization. Or maybe she was just too numb to care anymore. Mercer determined the coach could make it to Red Hollow with the drummer driving. The man had experience with freight wagons, apparently. The surveyor would ride shotgun, literally, with the dead driver's rifle. The arrangement left Elena standing beside Mercer's horse, understanding what came next. You've ridden before? He asked. In Philadelphia. Gentle horses in parks. His expression suggested that was somehow worse than never riding at all. This is Smoke. He doesn't bite, but he doesn't tolerate nonsense either. You'll ride behind me. The horse, Smoke, was massive up close, all muscle and barely contained power. Elena had never been this near anything so dangerous that wasn't actively trying to kill her. Mercer mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. Left foot in the stirrup, swing your right leg over. I'll pull you up. Elena hesitated. Taking his hand felt like accepting this whole insane situation, but standing in the dirt while the sun set felt like dying, so she gripped his forearm and let him haul her up behind him. She landed awkwardly, skirts bunching, legs spread in a way that would have scandalized every woman she'd known back east. Mercer's back was solid in front of her, his body radiating heat. Hold on, he said, and don't squirm. Smoke doesn't like squirming. Elena wrapped her arms around his waist because the alternative was falling off. Through his shirt, she could feel more scars, raised lines of damaged tissue that suggested a history of violence she didn't want to imagine. Mercer kicked Smoke into motion, and Elena's world became the rhythm of hoofbeats and the failing light and the solid, terrifying presence of the man who now owned her future. They rode in silence for the first hour. The coach followed behind, moving slower, the drummer clearly uncomfortable with managing a team. Elena watched the landscape change as shadows lengthened, rock formations giving way to sparse vegetation, the first suggestions of trees appearing in the distance. Red Hollow's in a valley, Mercer said suddenly, his voice carrying back to her. Protected by hills on 3 sides. Creek runs through it most of the year. About 200 people, give or take whoever died or left since I was last home. Sounds charming. Elena couldn't keep the bitterness out. It's not Philadelphia. He said it like that explained everything. But it's got a general store, a saloon, a church for folks who care about that sort of thing. And a jail, which is mostly where I spend my time. How fortunate for me. She felt rather than saw his shrug. You'll have the house to yourself most days. It's not big, but it's solid. Previous sheriff built it before he got shot. Comforting. Wasn't meant to be comforting, just facts. Mercer adjusted his grip on the reins. You need to understand something, Miss Whitmore. Red Hollow isn't civilized. People die here. They die from disease, from accidents, from each other. Women especially. This land eats Eastern women alive. Then why bring me here? Elena demanded. If I'm so likely to die, why bother collecting this debt? The pause stretched long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because your father asked me to. That made no sense. What? 2 years ago, when he signed the contract, he made me promise something. Mercer's voice had gone quieter, though no softer. Said if anything happened to him, I had to make sure you didn't end up desperate. Didn't end up in some eastern factory or worse. He figured a frontier sheriff was better than most alternatives. Elena's throat tightened. My father sold me to protect me. Your father was dying and broke and out of options. He did what he thought would keep you alive. Mercer's shoulders shifted. He wasn't a bad man, just unlucky. Unlucky. The word seemed inadequate for the cascade of disasters that had led here, to this moment, on this horse, with this stranger. Did you know him well? Elena asked. Well enough to know he loved you, talked about you constantly, showed me that photograph you carry, the one of your parents on their wedding day. The admission startled her. How did you? I'm observant, and I've been planning this for 2 years. He said it without shame. I know you had a fiancé who left. I know you sold everything trying to cover debts. I know you're smart enough to teach but too proud to ask for charity. Your father told me all of it, hoping I'd understand what I was getting. And what are you getting? The question came out raw. Another long pause. Then, someone who survives. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't kind. But something in the words suggested he believed it, and that was almost worse than cruelty. They rode on as full darkness fell. Stars appeared overhead, more than Elena had ever seen in her life, the sky so thick with them it looked like spilled milk. The moon rose, nearly full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Smoke's gait was steady, hypnotic. Despite everything, Elena felt her exhaustion catching up. Her head kept dipping forward, forehead brushing Mercer's back. Sleep if you need to, he said. I'll keep you on the horse. I'm fine. She forced her eyes open. You're falling asleep and lying about it. His tone held the faintest edge of amusement. Out here, Miss Whitmore, lying about being tired gets you killed. So sleep. We've got another hour of riding. Elena wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas, and the rocking motion of the horse made resistance futile. Her eyes drifted closed. Her grip on Mercer's waist loosened slightly as exhaustion dragged her under. She half woke some time later to Mercer's hand on her arm, steadying her as she started to slip sideways. He adjusted her position without comment, and she fell back asleep with her cheek pressed against his spine, too tired to care about propriety or pride. When she fully woke, lights flickered in the distance. Red Hollow, Mercer said. Welcome home. The town was smaller than Elena expected, a single main street with buildings clustered on either side, most dark at this hour. A few lanterns burned outside what might be the saloon, and she could hear voices, laughter, the sound of a piano badly out of tune. Mercer guided Smoke down the main street, and Elena felt eyes on them, even in the darkness. Curtains twitched. Shadows moved behind windows. By morning, the whole town would know the sheriff had returned with a woman. He stopped in front of a small house at the edge of town. Simple, square, functional. A porch wrapped around the front. No decorations, no flowers, nothing soft. This is it. Mercer dismounted, then reached up to help Elena down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit ground. She'd been on that horse for hours, muscles screaming. Mercer's hand stayed on her elbow until she found her balance. Inside, he said, grabbing her bag with his free hand. I'll tend to Smoke, then get you settled. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Who would rob the sheriff? Elena stepped into darkness, waited while Mercer lit a lamp. Warm light spread across a single room. Kitchen area on one side, a table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove. A doorway led to what must be the bedroom. It was clean, sparse, the home of someone who didn't care about comfort. Bedroom's through there, Mercer set her bag down. I'll sleep out here for now, give you privacy to adjust. Elena turned to face him, the stranger she'd agreed to marry. In the lamplight, his scars looked deeper, his face harder. A killer's face, a survivor's face. When? She asked. When what? When is the wedding? Tomorrow afternoon. Reverend Milton will do it. Mercer pulled off his hat, ran a hand through dark hair that needed cutting. Nothing fancy. I'll find you something to wear that isn't covered in trail dust. How romantic. The words came out bitter. Wasn't aiming for romance, Miss Whitmore. Just legality. He moved toward the door. There's a basin and pitcher in the bedroom. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll be back in an hour with supplies for breakfast. He left before she could respond. Elena stood alone in the small house, listening to his footsteps fade. Then, slowly, she walked into the bedroom. A bed, larger than she expected, covered with a plain quilt. A wardrobe. A washstand with the promised basin and pitcher. One window overlooking darkness. She poured water into the basin, washed her face and hands, watched the water turn gray with trail dust. Her reflection in the small mirror looked like a stranger, hair wild, dress ruined, eyes haunted. This was her life now. This room, this house, this man who'd orchestrated everything from 2 years away. Elena unpacked her bag slowly. A few dresses, undergarments, the photograph. She set her parents' wedding picture on the washstand, studied their young faces. "You did this to protect me," she whispered to her father's image. "You thought this would save me." The photograph offered no answers. Elena sat on the bed, her bed, she supposed, though nothing here felt like hers, and let herself cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears for everything she'd lost. Her father, her mother, her home, her future as she'd imagined it. When the tears stopped, she felt emptier but clearer. Crying wouldn't change anything, neither would rage or denial or hope. She was here. She was trapped, and tomorrow she'd marry a man who looked at her like a debt to be settled. The front door opened. Mercer's footsteps, then his voice. "Brought bread and eggs. You hungry?" Elena wiped her eyes, steadied her breathing. "No." A pause. "You need to eat." I said no. Another pause, longer. Then, "Suit yourself. Food's on the table if you change your mind." She heard him moving around, the clank of a pan, the smell of something cooking. Her stomach growled despite herself. She'd barely eaten all day. Pride, she decided, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Elena emerged from the bedroom. Mercer stood at the stove, scrambling eggs with the efficiency of someone who'd cooked for himself for years. He didn't look at her. "Sit," he said. "It'll be ready in a minute." She sat at the table, watched him work. His movements were economical, no wasted effort. He plated the eggs, added bread, set it in front of her. Then he made himself a plate and sat across from her. They ate in silence. The eggs were decent, not great, but edible. The bread was fresh, probably from the general store. Elena finished everything on her plate because her body demanded it, not because she wanted to. When she was done, she stood. "Thank you for the meal." "You're welcome." Mercer didn't look up from his own plate. Elena returned to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay down fully dressed on top of the quilt. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mercer cleaning up, the sound of water, dishes being stacked, then silence. She stared at the ceiling, the stranger's ceiling, and wondered how long it would take before she stopped feeling like a prisoner. Outside, the frontier night pressed close. Coyotes howled, wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, Red Hollow slept, this town that would witness her forced wedding tomorrow, this place that might kill her or shape her into something new. Elena closed her eyes and dreamed of Philadelphia streets she'd never walk again. Morning arrived with roosters and the smell of wood smoke. Elena woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then reality crashed back. The small bedroom, the rough quilt, the sound of boots on floorboards outside her door. Her wedding day. She lay still, listening to Mercer move around the main room. The stove door creaked open. Something heavy hit the floor, probably firewood. Then his voice, muffled but clear. "Coffee's ready when you are." Elena forced herself upright. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, her hair a disaster. She found the basin, washed as best she could with cold water, tried to make herself presentable. The mirror showed a woman who looked like she'd survived something, which wasn't far from the truth. When she emerged, Mercer was at the table with coffee and what looked like leftover bread. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Elena sat, accepted the coffee he pushed toward her. It was strong enough to strip paint, but hot and bitter in a way that helped. They drank in silence for a minute. Then Mercer stood, walked to a trunk in the corner, and returned with a bundle of dark fabric. "Found this at the general store last night," he said, setting it on the table. "Should fit well enough." Elena unfolded it. A dress, simple but new, deep blue with minimal ornamentation. Nothing like what she'd have chosen for a wedding back east, but infinitely better than her ruined traveling clothes. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. Mercer shrugged. Can't have you getting married in rags. People would talk. As opposed to talking about the sheriff forcing some Eastern woman to marry him, his jaw tightened. They'll talk regardless. Might as well give them less ammunition. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door. Ceremony's at 2. Reverend Milton's place, end of Main Street. I'll come get you at 1:45. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her new dress and the reality of what came next. She spent the morning trying not to think, washed her hair in the basin, braided it carefully, put on the blue dress. It fit reasonably well. Mercer had guessed her measurements accurately, which was either impressive or disturbing. She found herself wondering how many women he'd known well enough to judge sizes. Then she stopped wondering because that path led nowhere good. At 1:30, someone knocked. Elena opened the door to find a woman roughly her age, blonde and pretty, holding a small basket. Miss Whitmore? The woman's smile was warm but cautious. I'm Sarah Chen, run the general store with my husband. Thought you might want some company before. Elena stepped back, letting her in. That's kind of you. Sarah set the basket on the table. It held wildflowers, clearly just picked. For your hair, if you want. I know this isn't... the circumstances aren't... She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. You can say it, Elena said. This isn't a normal wedding. No? Sarah's relief was visible. But that doesn't mean you can't look nice. May I? Before Elena could answer, Sarah was already weaving flowers into her braid with practiced fingers. I heard what happened, she said quietly. The contract, your father's debt. Everyone's heard by now. Of course they have. Elena kept her voice flat. For what it's worth, Colt's not the worst man you could have ended up with. Sarah worked another flower into place. I know how it looks. The scars, the way he doesn't talk much. But he's fair, doesn't cheat people, and he's kept this town alive when plenty of others failed. You're defending him. Elena couldn't keep the edge out. I'm giving you context. Sarah moved around to face her. You're angry. You should be. But you're also stuck here, and making an enemy of the only person who can protect you seems like a bad strategy. The bluntness surprised Elena. You always this direct? Life's too short for dancing around the truth. Sarah finished with the flowers, stepped back to assess her work. There. You look like a bride now. Sad one maybe, but still. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first Red Hollow winter. Sarah picked up her basket. When that happens, you'll either be dead, gone, or one of us. I'm betting on the third option, but I've been wrong before. She left before Elena could respond. At 1:45, Mercer knocked. Elena opened the door to find him transformed, or as close to transformed as he seemed capable of. Clean shirt, black vest, hat in hand. He'd shaved, revealing more of the scars on his jaw. His eyes flickered over her dress, the flowers in her hair. You look good, he said simply. Thank you. Elena stepped out, pulled the door closed. Let's get this over with. They walked down Main Street in silence. Elena felt eyes on them from every window, every doorway. A few people stood openly watching, an old man on the saloon porch, a group of women outside the general store. Sarah among them, giving Elena a small nod of encouragement. Reverend Milton's place was a small white building at the end of the street, cross-mounted above the door. Inside, it was dim and plain, wooden pews, a simple altar, windows that needed washing. The Reverend himself was a thin man in his 60s, kind eyes behind wire spectacles. Sheriff Mercer, he greeted them. Miss Whitmore. Shall we begin? No witnesses, Elena realized. Just the three of them. Somehow that made it worse. Like this ceremony was something shameful that needed to happen in private. Mercer seemed to read her thoughts. Didn't figure you wanted an audience. He was right, but she hated that he was right. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Reverend Milton read from a worn Bible, his voice gentle but perfunctory. The words washed over Elena. Love, honor, cherish, sickness, and health. All of it meaningless when the groom had blackmailed the bride into standing there. Do you, Colt Mercer, take Elena Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. No hesitation. And do you, Elena Whitmore, Take Colt Mercer to be your lawfully wedded husband." The pause stretched. Elena felt Mercer's eyes on her, felt the Reverend's patient waiting. She thought about running, just turning and walking out, consequences be damned. But where would she go? "I do." The words tasted like ash. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Milton closed his Bible. "You may kiss the bride." Mercer looked at Elena. She looked back, defiant, daring him to try. He didn't. Just took her hand, his palm was rough, calloused, and said, "Thank you, Reverend." They signed the marriage certificate. Elena's hand shook writing her new name. Elena Mercer. It looked wrong, like someone else's signature. Outside, the sun was too bright. Elena blinked against it, feeling disconnected from her body. Married. She was married to a stranger who'd manipulated her entire life to make this happen. "Need anything from town?" Mercer asked. "Otherwise, we should head back." "I'm fine." She wasn't, but admitting otherwise seemed dangerous. They walked back to the house. More stairs, more whispers. Elena kept her chin up, refused to look ashamed. She hadn't done anything wrong. This wasn't her fault. Back at the house, Mercer hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I've got to check on something at the jail. Be back before supper." "Don't rush on my account," Elena said. He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Elena." "Mrs. Mercer," she corrected coldly. "Isn't that what you wanted? Legality?" His jaw worked. "I know this isn't what you wanted." Very perceptive. "But we're stuck with each other now, so we can make this miserable, or we can try to make it work." Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. "Make it work? You engineered my entire arrival here. You manipulated everything to force me into this marriage. And now you want me to just... what? Pretend that's acceptable? I want you to survive." His voice dropped. "Because like it or not, you're my wife now. Which means your survival is my responsibility, and your cooperation would make that easier. How generous of you to take responsibility for the trap you set." Mercer's expression hardened. "Your father..." "Don't." Elena's voice cracked. "Don't use my father to justify this. He's dead. He can't defend himself or explain or just don't." They stared at each other, the space between them thick with anger and resentment, and something else Elena didn't want to name. Then Mercer turned and left, the door closing with deliberate gentleness that somehow felt worse than slamming. Elena stood alone in her new home, her new life, her new prison. She spent the afternoon unpacking her few belongings, trying to impose some order on the chaos of her situation. But the house resisted her efforts. Everything was Mercer's, from the furniture to the dishes to the very air. Nothing here was hers except the small bag of things she'd brought. When evening came, so did the storm. Elena had noticed the clouds building all afternoon, dark and heavy. Now thunder rolled across the valley, lightning splitting the sky. Rain came in sheets, hammering the roof, turning the street outside into a river of mud. Mercer still hadn't returned. Elena lit the lamp, tried not to worry. He was a grown man, a sheriff, perfectly capable of handling himself. His absence was a relief, actually. She wasn't ready to face him again, wasn't ready to navigate whatever this marriage was supposed to look like. But as full darkness fell and the storm intensified, worry crept in anyway. The door burst open at 8. Mercer stumbled inside, soaked through, bleeding from a cut above his left eye. Elena jumped up from the table. "What happened?" "Bar fight." He leaned against the doorframe, breathing hard. Two minors decided to settle a claim dispute with fists and bottles. I settled it differently. Blood ran down his face, mixing with rain. Elena found herself moving before thinking, grabbing a clean cloth, pumping water into a basin. "Sit," she ordered, pointing at a chair. Mercer obeyed, probably too tired to argue. Elena approached with the wet cloth, hesitated. She'd never touched him beyond that awful handshake at their wedding. Now she was supposed to. "It's just a cut," Mercer said, his voice rough. "Won't kill me." "Infections will." Elena steeled herself and pressed the cloth to his forehead. He winced, but didn't pull away. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. More scars. A thin line through his eyebrow, another along his cheekbone. His eyes were the same cold gray, but tired now, the kind of exhaustion that came from more than one long day. And something else, Pain, maybe, that had nothing to do with the fresh cut. How bad's the other guy? She asked, wiping blood away. Which one? A ghost of dark humor. One's got a broken nose, other one's sleeping it off in a cell. And the third? There were 5. Mercer met her eyes. I don't start fights, Mrs. Mercer, but I end them. The formality of her married name in his voice made her hand pause. Mrs. Mercer. She was that now, whether she wanted it or not. Hold still. She cleaned the wound carefully. It wasn't deep, but head wounds bled impressively. You need stitches? No, just needs to close. Elena found herself oddly disappointed. Stitching him up would have given her something to do, some way to feel useful. Instead, she just pressed the cloth against his forehead until the bleeding slowed. Thank you, Mercer said when she finally stepped back. Don't thank me. You're my... She caught herself. I can't have you bleeding all over the house. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. He stood, peeling off his wet shirt. Elena looked away quickly, but not before catching a glimpse of more scars crisscrossing his torso. Whatever life he'd lived before this, it had been violent. I'll sleep out here again tonight, he said, grabbing a blanket from the trunk. Give you space. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She retreated to the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it. Her hands were shaking. She'd just tended to her husband's wounds. Her husband. The words still felt foreign, like a language she didn't speak. Through the door, she heard Mercer settling on what must be an uncomfortable floor. The storm continued outside, rain drumming endlessly. Elena climbed into bed fully dressed again, stared at the ceiling, and wondered how long they could keep living like strangers under the same roof. The answer came sooner than expected. 3 days after the wedding, Elena woke to find Mercer already gone and a note on the table. Riding out to check on homesteads north of town. Back in 3 days. Money in the jar if you need anything. CM. 3 days alone. Elena should have been relieved. Instead, she felt oddly abandoned. She spent the first day exploring the house properly. Mercer's belongings were sparse. Clothes, weapons, a few books she was surprised to find. One was poetry, Byron, pages worn from reading. The discovery didn't fit the man she'd been building in her mind. The second day, she ventured into town. Sarah Chen greeted her warmly at the general store, introduced her to her husband James, a quiet Chinese man who spoke better English than most, and treated Elena with careful respect. Anything you need, Sarah said. Just ask. Colt's got credit here. Elena bought fabric for curtains. Small rebellion, but hers. Other townspeople were less welcoming. She felt their stares, their whispers. At the post office, the clerk barely spoke to her. At the butcher's, the owner's wife looked her up and down with obvious disdain. You're the one who married Colt for money, the woman said. Not a question. Elena's face burned. I married him because I had no choice. We all got choices, honey. You just didn't like yours. The woman wrapped her purchase with aggressive efficiency. Colt Mercer's a good man, better than you deserve, coming out here with your Eastern airs. Elena left without responding, humiliation burning in her chest. So that's what they thought, that she was some gold digger who'd trapped the sheriff. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. On the third day, she was hanging her new curtains when a woman knocked on the door. Late 30s, expensively dressed for Red Hollow, with calculating eyes and a cold smile. Mrs. Mercer, the woman greeted her. I'm Victoria Hale. My husband owns the bank. Thought I'd welcome you properly to town. Elena stepped back, letting her in. Victoria swept through the small house with barely concealed judgment, taking in the plain furniture, the new curtains, Elena's simple dress. How quaint, Victoria said. You've tried to make it homey. That's sweet. The condescension was thick enough to choke on. Elena forced a smile. Can I offer you coffee? No, thank you. I won't stay long. Victoria settled on a chair like she was tolerating filth. I just wanted to give you some advice, woman to woman. How kind. Red Hollow has a certain social structure. The families who've been here longest, who own land and businesses, we set the tone. The sheriff, well, he's necessary, but he's not exactly society. Elena's forced smile grew sharper. I see. Do you? Victoria leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, you're a desperate Eastern woman who married into the working class. You have no position here, Mrs. Mercer, no standing, and trying to put on airs with new curtains won't change that. The words hit like slaps. Elena felt heat crawl up her neck, fury and humiliation warring in her chest. Thank you for making your feelings clear, she said, voice tight. Oh, I'm not trying to be cruel. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirts. Just realistic. You seem like a smart woman, smart enough to know your place. She left in a rustle of expensive fabric and cheap perfume. Elena stood in her small house, with her inadequate curtains, and felt something harden inside her. These people, the butcher's wife, Victoria Hale, all the others who looked at her with contempt, they saw her as weak, an outsider, someone who didn't belong. They had no idea what she'd survived to get here. When Mercer returned that evening, earlier than expected, he found Elena at the stove making stew. She'd butchered the vegetables with particular violence, imagining Victoria Hale's face with each chop. You're back, she said, not looking up. Trail washed out, had to turn around. He hung his hat, studied her. Something wrong? No. You're lying. Elena slammed the knife down. Why would anything be wrong? I'm just living my wonderful new life in this wonderful town where everyone thinks I'm either a gold digger or a desperate fool. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Then, who said what? Does it matter? It does to me. Elena turned to face him. He looked tired, trail-worn, but his expression was serious, dangerously so. Victoria Hale came by, Elena said, made sure I understood my place in the social hierarchy, which is apparently somewhere below the people who matter. Mercer's jaw tightened. Victoria Hale is a mean-spirited woman who thinks money buys class. Ignore her. Easy for you to say. You're not the one being sneered at in every shop. No. His voice went flat. I'm just the one they smile at while thinking I'm not good enough to wipe their boots. Been that way since I became sheriff. You get used to it. The admission surprised her. Elena had assumed his position gave him respect, if not affection. But looking at him now, she saw the truth. He was tolerated, not accepted. Necessary, not wanted, just like her. How do you stand it? She asked. Mercer shrugged. I do my job. Keep them safe, whether they appreciate it or not. And I don't waste time caring what they think. That simple? That's simple. He moved to the basin, washed trail dust from his hands. But if Victoria bothers you again, tell me. There are ways to make her husband's banking business less convenient. Elena almost smiled despite herself. You do that? You're my wife. Someone disrespects you, they disrespect me. He said it matter-of-factly, like protecting her was just another duty. Besides, Samuel Hale's been shorting homesteaders on land prices. Been looking for an excuse to investigate. Remind me not to get on your bad side, Elena muttered. Too late for that. But there was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. They ate stew in companionable silence. Not quite friendly, but not hostile either. A truce, maybe. Or just exhaustion from fighting battles on too many fronts. After dinner, Mercer surprised her again. I'll be sleeping in the bedroom tonight. Elena froze. What? Not with you. He held up a hand. But the floor out here's killing my back, and you've had 3 days to adjust. I'll sleep on top of the quilt. You under it. Won't touch you. Every part of Elena wanted to refuse. But she looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion in his eyes. The way he moved like his whole body hurt. 3 days riding hard trails, dealing with whatever problems the homesteaders had, and he'd been sleeping on a floor for her comfort. Fine, she heard herself say, but stay on your side. Yes, ma'am. Yes. That night, Elena lay rigid under the quilt, while Mercer settled on top of it, as far to his edge as physically possible. The bed was bigger than necessary, but it still felt impossibly intimate sharing it with him. She listened to his breathing slow, deepen. Within minutes he was asleep, the instant unconsciousness of someone perpetually exhausted. Elena stayed awake longer, hyper-aware of his presence, his warmth, the simple fact of another person in her bed. Eventually exhaustion claimed her too. She woke once in the night, disoriented. Mercer was still asleep, one arm thrown over his head, his face younger in the moonlight filtering through the window. Without the hard expression he wore when awake, she could see what he might have looked like before the scars, before whatever had turned him into this. Elena looked away quickly, closed her eyes, and tried not to think about the fact that this was her life now. Every night. This bed, this man, this strange half-marriage they were navigating. Morning came too soon. Mercer was up before dawn, already dressed by the time Elena woke. He nodded to her without speaking, left her to dress in privacy. They fell into a routine over the next weeks. Mercer worked long hours, out before sunrise, often back after dark. Elena kept house, which was easier than expected since he owned so little and demanded less. She cooked, cleaned, sewed her curtains, tried to make this place feel like home instead of a cell. The town slowly, grudgingly, began accepting her, or at least stopped actively sneering. Sarah Chen became a genuine friend, teaching Elena which plants grew in Red Hollow's harsh soil, how to preserve meat for winter, which shopkeepers could be trusted, and which would cheat her. "You're doing better than most Eastern women," Sarah said one afternoon at the general store. "Most don't make it 2 weeks before running back home." "I don't have a home to run to," Elena reminded her. "No, but you could have found a way if you really wanted." Sarah sorted through fabric bolts. "The fact you're still here says something. Says I'm stubborn. Says you're a survivor." Sarah pulled out a deep green fabric. "This would look good on you. Make Colt's eyes pop right out of his head." Elena felt herself flush. "I'm not trying to—" "I know. Just saying he looks at you sometimes when you're not watching, like he's trying to figure something out." "Figure what out?" Sarah grinned. "That's between you two. I just sell fabric." Elena bought the green fabric, telling herself it was practical. She needed another dress. The color had nothing to do with Mercer's gray eyes. She was cutting the pattern that evening when Mercer came home bleeding again, this time from a knife wound on his forearm wrapped in an already soaked bandana. What happened? Elena was getting tired of asking that question. Drunk tried to rob the payroll shipment. Didn't succeed. Mercer unwrapped the bandana, revealing a nasty gash. Needs stitching. Sit. Elena gathered supplies, needle, thread, whiskey for cleaning. Her hand shook slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "This is going to hurt." "Most things do." He sat at the table, laid his arm flat. Elena cleaned the wound with whiskey. Mercer didn't flinch, just watched her work with those unsettling gray eyes. She threaded the needle, hesitated. "You've done this before?" he asked. "On fabric, not people." "Same principle. Just go slow." The first stitch made her stomach turn. Pushing a needle through human skin felt wrong on every level, but Mercer sat perfectly still, breathing steady, and something in his calm helped her find her own. She worked carefully, small stitches, trying to make them even. Mercer's arm was corded with muscle under scarred skin. She counted 7 old wounds just on his forearm alone. "How are you still alive?" The question slipped out. "Luck? Skill? Stubbornness?" He paused. "Good doctors." "I'm not a good doctor." "You're doing fine." Elena tied off the last stitch, wrapped his arm in clean bandaging. "There. Try not to get stabbed again for at least a week." "I'll make a note." He flexed his arm gently, testing the stitches. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Elena cleaned up the supplies, very aware of him watching her. "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "This. The job. Getting shot, stabbed, beaten. There must be easier ways to make a living." Mercer considered the question. "Because someone has to. This territory's too young for real law, too old for pure chaos. Sheriff's the line between those things. If I don't hold it, people die. People die anyway. More would die." He stood, wincing slightly. "I'm not a hero, Elena, but I'm good at violence. Might as well use it for something that matters." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her. Elena found herself studying his face, looking for the man behind the scars and the cold demeanor. "Did you always want to be a sheriff?" she asked. "No." Something flickered in his expression. Wanted to be a lot of things. Life had different ideas. He didn't elaborate and Elena didn't push. But later, lying in bed with him on his side of the quilt, she thought about that flicker of old dreams in his eyes. This hard man who killed without hesitation and read Byron poetry in the evenings, he'd wanted something else once, just like her. The first snow came in October, early and vicious. Elena woke to white covering everything, wind howling like something dying. Mercer was already up, stoking the fire. "Storm's going to be bad," he said. 3, maybe 4 days. We've got enough supplies? Elena mentally cataloged their pantry. I think so. Good, because we're not leaving this house until it clears. He was right. The storm hit with frightening intensity, burying Red Hollow in snow, turning the world outside their windows into a white nightmare. The wind screamed constantly. The house creaked under the assault, and for 3 days, Elena and Mercer were trapped together with nowhere to hide. The first day was awkward. They moved around each other carefully, speaking only when necessary. Elena cooked, Mercer maintained the fire. They ate in silence. The second day, the walls started closing in. Elena caught herself pacing, restless and anxious. Mercer sat at the table cleaning weapons, the repetitive motion seemingly calming him. You're going to wear a groove in the floor, he said without looking up. I need to move. Then move with purpose. He nodded at the fabric she'd been cutting. Finish your dress. So she did, if only to have something to occupy her hands. Mercer continued his weapon maintenance, and they worked in parallel, the storm raging outside. On the third day, cabin fever set in hard. I can't do this, Elena said suddenly, dropping the dress. I can't just sit here. Mercer looked up from the rifle he was oiling. Storm's still going. I don't care. I need to... She gestured helplessly. Something. Anything. Talk, he suggested. About what? Anything you want. He set down the rifle. You've been here 6 weeks. I don't know anything about you except you're angry and stubborn and better with a needle than you think. The observation surprised her. You want to know about me? We're married. Seems like I should. Elena sat across from him, suddenly nervous. What do you want to know? What did you want to be? Before all this? The question echoed her own from weeks ago. Elena thought about lying, deflecting, but something about being trapped in a snowstorm made honesty easier. A writer, she admitted. I wanted to write novels, not the romantic nonsense ladies are supposed to write, but real stories. Adventures, mysteries, things that mattered. Why didn't you? Because it wasn't proper. Because my father wanted me to marry well and be a gentleman's wife. Because... She trailed off. Because I let fear stop me. Mercer nodded slowly. I wanted to be a doctor. Elena stared at him. A doctor? Studied for it even. 2 years at a medical college back east. His hands moved restlessly over the rifle. Then the war came. They needed soldiers more than doctors. By the time it ended, I'd seen enough blood that saving people seemed pointless, so I became good at the other thing instead. The confession hung between them. Elena tried to imagine this hard, scarred man bent over medical texts, trying to heal instead of kill. The image wouldn't come. Do you regret it? She asked. Every day. He said it simply. But regret doesn't change anything. We are what we became. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, Elena looked at her husband and saw him clearly for maybe the first time. Not a villain, not a savior. Just a man who'd wanted different things and ended up here, same as her. I'm sorry, she said, about your dreams. I'm sorry about yours. He met her eyes. For what it's worth, I think you'd write good stories. You notice things, details. How would you know? The curtains, the way you've rearranged things. You're trying to make this place tell a story, that someone lives here, not just exists. He gestured around the room. Before you came, it was just a place to sleep. Now it's... Home? Elena supplied. Something like that. The moment stretched, fragile and unexpected. Then the fire popped, breaking the spell, and they both looked away. The storm finally broke on the 4th morning. Elena woke to silence. Blessed, beautiful silence. Mercer was already bundling up for the bitter cold. Gonna check on folks, he said. Storm this bad, people are gonna need help. Be careful. He paused at the door, looked back at her. I always am. But he wasn't, Elena discovered. He came back 12 hours later, half frozen, having given his coat to a widow whose roof had collapsed, his gloves to children whose father had died trying to fix their chimney, his scarf to an old man trapped in a snowdrift. Elena stripped his frozen clothes off with shaking hands, wrapped him in blankets, made him sit by the fire while she heated water for tea. You could have died, she said, her voice sharper than intended. Didn't, though. That's not the point. Elena thrust tea at him. What good are you to anyone dead? What good am I to anyone if I let people freeze while I stay warm? He wrapped his hands around the cup. It's my job, Elena, not just keeping order, keeping people alive. Even at the cost of your own life? If necessary. He said it like it was obvious. Elena wanted to scream at him. Instead, she found more blankets, stoked the fire higher, made stew rich with meat and vegetables. She fed him like he was one of the people he'd saved, ignored his protests that he was fine, and refused to let him move from the fire until he stopped shivering. Later, in bed, she felt him curl slightly toward the warmth where she lay, not touching, but closer than usual. She didn't move away. Winter deepened. Elena learned to navigate Red Hollow's social maze, who to trust, who to avoid, how to deflect Victoria Hale's barbs without engaging. She learned to shoot, because Mercer insisted, and discovered she had decent aim when she stopped overthinking it. She learned her husband too, slowly, how he took his coffee, the way he cleaned his guns when he was worried, that he read Byron when he couldn't sleep, that he had nightmares sometimes, waking silent and tense, and the best thing she could do was pretend she hadn't noticed. And she learned that the anger she'd carried since the stagecoach ambush was slowly, quietly burning itself out. Not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for that. But the sharp edges were dulling into something softer, more complicated, something that felt dangerous in entirely different ways. Spring came late to Red Hollow, the snow refusing to surrender until mid-April. When the thaw finally arrived, it brought mud thick enough to swallow wagon wheels and a restlessness that infected the whole town. People emerged from their winter hibernation angry, bored, and looking for trouble. Mercer found it at the Silver Dollar Saloon on a Tuesday night. Elena was mending one of his shirts when she heard the gunshot. Her needle stilled, heart jumping. One shot could mean anything: celebration, accident, warning. It was the second and third shots that had her on her feet, the fourth and fifth that sent her running toward the door. Sarah intercepted her halfway down Main Street, grabbing her arm. Don't! Colt's handling it. Handling what? Elena tried to pull free. Bar fight turned into something worse. 3 drifters came through this afternoon, been drinking since, started trouble with some minors. Sarah's grip tightened. Colt went in 20 minutes ago. You going in there won't help. Another shot. Glass breaking. Men shouting. Elena's whole body wanted to move toward the noise, toward Mercer, but Sarah was right. She'd be a liability, not help. They waited. Minutes crawled past. More shouts, but no more gunfire. Then the saloon doors burst open, and Mercer appeared, dragging 2 men by their collars. Both were bleeding, one unconscious. Behind him, the saloon owner followed with the 3rd drifter at gunpoint. Mercer's face was stone, but Elena could see blood on his knuckles, a fresh bruise forming along his jaw. He hauled the drifters toward the jail without looking at the small crowd that had gathered. Show's over, he said flatly. Go home. People dispersed slowly. Elena stayed where she was, watching him disappear into the jail. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. Give him an hour. He'll need time to process them, cool down. Sarah started walking her back toward the house. Bar fights always make him mean. Mean how? Just sharp. Like all his edges are exposed. Sarah sighed. He'll be fine once the anger burns out. Always is. But when Mercer came home 3 hours later, Elena could see Sarah had been wrong. The anger hadn't burned out. It had gone cold and hard, turned inward to something worse. He moved through the house like a ghost, not speaking, barely acknowledging her presence. When Elena tried to ask if he was hurt, he gave her a look that could have stripped paint and headed for the bedroom. Elena gave him 10 minutes, then followed. She found him sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, staring at nothing. His hands were shaking slightly, delayed reaction, she'd learned, the violence catching up after the fact. Colt. She used his first name carefully. They'd been married 5 months, but she still defaulted to Sheriff or Mercer most of the time. His name felt intimate in her mouth. What happened? Nothing. His voice was flat. Just another fight. You're shaking. I'm fine. Elena moved closer, saw the details he was hiding. Blood on his shirt. Not his. Torn knuckles. And his eyes, normally so controlled, were dark with something she couldn't name. Talk to me, she said. About what? How I beat 3 men unconscious with my bare hands? How one of them was barely 20 and dumb with whiskey rather than mean? His laugh was harsh. That's the job, Elena. Some nights, it's stopping actual criminals. Other nights, it's breaking the bones of stupid kids who don't know better. The self-loathing in his voice hit her like a physical blow. She'd seen him angry before, seen him cold and efficient. But this was different. This was a man disgusted with himself. He'll heal, Elena said quietly. Bones mend. Some things don't. Mercer stood abruptly, moved to the window. You know what the worst part is? I'm good at it. Hurting people. It comes easy, too easy. Because you were trained for it. Training's an excuse. Plenty of men came back from the war and found other ways to live. He pressed his forehead against the glass. I chose this. Every day I choose it. Elena had learned enough about him over the winter to understand what he wasn't saying. The war had made him capable of violence. But something deeper, some belief that this was all he deserved, all he was good for, kept him locked in it. She crossed the room, stood beside him at the window. Outside, Red Hollow was dark except for scattered lamplight. Peaceful. Safe. Because of him. Those miners, she said, the ones the drifters started trouble with. What would have happened if you hadn't been there? Someone would have died. Exactly. Elena turned to face him. You stopped that. Yes, it was violent. Yes, people got hurt. But they're alive. That has to count for something. Mercer looked at her, really looked, and for a moment the mask he wore cracked completely. She saw the exhaustion underneath, the weight of every violent thing he'd done, the war that never really ended for him. You shouldn't have to comfort me for doing my job, he said. I'm not comforting you. I'm reminding you why you do it. Elena surprised herself by reaching out, touching his torn knuckles gently. Someone has to stand between chaos and civilization. You said that yourself. It's a brutal job. That doesn't make you brutal. Doesn't it? No, she said it firmly. You read poetry. You gave away your coat in a blizzard. You sleep on your side of the bed, even though I know the floor was more comfortable than trying not to disturb me. She paused. Brutal men don't do those things. Something shifted in his expression. The cold anger didn't disappear, but it loosened slightly. He looked down at her hand still touching his, then back at her face. When did you stop hating me? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Elena started to deflect, then stopped. They'd been dancing around too many truths for too long. I don't know, she admitted. Somewhere between the first snowstorm and last week, when you brought home that stray dog and pretended it was for security. His mouth twitched despite himself. Dog's good security. Dog's 16 pounds and afraid of mice. Strategic deception. Elena almost smiled. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the copper tang of blood in the leather of his gun belt. This close, she could count the individual scars on his face, map the geography of violence written on his skin. Let me clean your hands, she said. Mercer followed her to the basin without arguing. Elena washed his knuckles carefully, feeling the damaged ridges of old scars beneath fresh cuts. His hands were workers' hands, fighters' hands. Hands that had killed but also protected. The drifters, she asked as she worked. What'll happen to them? Jail until they're sober, then I'll run them out of town with a warning. He watched her tend to him. The young one. His name's Charlie. 17, broke, following his brothers because he doesn't know what else to do. I've seen 100 like him. Will he listen to the warning? Probably not. They never do. Mercer's jaw tightened. In 6 months, he'll be dead or in prison, and there's nothing I can do to stop it except maybe delay it by one night. Elena heard the futility in his voice, the wearing knowledge that some fights couldn't be won. She wrapped his hands in clean bandages, then surprised them both by keeping hold of them. You can't save everyone, she said, but you saved him tonight. That matters. For tonight. Yes, for tonight. Elena met his eyes. Sometimes that's all we get, one night at a time. They stood there, hands clasped, something fragile building between them. Then Mercer gently pulled away, breaking the moment. I should let you sleep, he said. You should sleep too. I will. Eventually. He wouldn't, though, Elena knew. He'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, fighting whatever demons the violence had stirred up. She'd learned his patterns over the winter, could predict them now. On impulse, she caught his hand again. Stay. Not... She felt herself flush. Just stay. You don't have to sleep, but don't sit out there alone. Mercer studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded. They lay in bed in the darkness, both on top of the quilt this time, not touching, but present. Elena listened to his breathing, too controlled, too measured. Not sleeping, just existing. Tell me something, she said into the darkness. Something true. About what? Anything. I just want to hear your voice. Silence stretched. Then, the first time I saw your photograph, 2 years ago when your father showed it to me, I thought you looked sad. Elena turned her head to look at him. His profile was visible in the moonlight through the window. I was engaged. I should have been happy. You should have been, but you weren't. He kept staring at the ceiling. I remember thinking your father was wrong to push you toward that life, that you'd be miserable as some banker's wife, attending parties and pretending to care about things that didn't matter. So you decided to make me a sheriff's wife instead? I decided to give you a chance at something different. Didn't say it would be better, just different. Elena thought about that. Her life in Philadelphia, the endless social calls, the gossip, the suffocating expectations. She'd have gone mad as Edmund's wife, slowly strangled by propriety and boredom. This life was harder, more dangerous, more uncertain. But it was real in a way Philadelphia never had been. I hated you for it, she said, for taking away my choice. I know, but I think I would have hated myself more if I'd stayed. The admission cost her. So maybe you weren't completely wrong, just mostly wrong. She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. I'll take mostly wrong. They fell quiet again. This time when sleep came for Elena, she let it, feeling oddly safe with Mercer lying awake beside her, keeping watch against his own demons. She woke in the early hours to find him finally asleep, one hand curled loosely near hers on the quilt. Not touching, but close. Like even unconscious, part of him was reaching for her. Elena didn't pull away. The incident at the Silver Dollar marked a shift between them. Not dramatic, they didn't suddenly become a loving couple. But the sharp edges of their arrangement dulled further. They talked more, touched occasionally without flinching, existed together instead of around each other. Sarah noticed immediately. You're different, she said one afternoon at the store. Different how? Less angry, more... Sarah searched for words. Present. Like you're actually living here instead of just surviving. Elena couldn't argue. She was present in ways she hadn't been before. She'd started writing again. Nothing serious, just observations about frontier life, character sketches of people she met. The words came easier here, sharper, and more honest than anything she'd written back east. She'd also started to notice things about Mercer that had nothing to do with anger or resentment. The way he moved, economical and sure. How his rare smiles transformed his face completely. The gentleness in his hands when he thought no one was watching, petting that ridiculous small dog or handling a child's scraped knee. She noticed, and the noticing felt dangerous. May brought new problems. A fire broke out at the grain warehouse, sparked by faulty lantern oil. By the time Mercer and half the town formed a bucket brigade, the building was already lost. The fight became about saving the structures around it. Elena joined the brigade without thinking, passing buckets until her arms screamed and her dress was soaked through. The fire raged for hours, heat so intense it blistered skin from 10 feet away. She lost track of Mercer in the chaos, focused only on the next bucket, the next person, the rhythm of pass and throw. When the fire finally died, dawn was breaking. Elena sat in the mud, exhausted beyond thought. Around her, townspeople collapsed in similar states. The warehouse was gone, but they'd saved everything else. Elena. She looked up to find Mercer standing over her. He was covered in soot and ash, his shirt burned through in places, fresh burns visible on his forearms. But his eyes were wild with something that looked like fear. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're bleeding. He knelt beside her, took her hands. Her palms were raw, blistered from the bucket handles. She hadn't even felt it during the fight. It's nothing. It's not nothing. His voice was rough, damaged by smoke. You should have stayed back. This wasn't... You didn't need to... Yes, I did. Elena cut him off. This is my town too now. These people are mine to help. Something flashed across his face. Pride maybe, or fear, or both tangled together. He lifted one of her damaged hands, studied the blisters with a physician's eye he'd probably never lost completely. Come on, he said, helping her stand. We need to treat these before they get infected. Back at the house, Mercer tended to her hands with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence she'd seen him capable of. He cleaned each blister, applied salve, wrapped them in soft bandages. You need to rest, he said when he was done. So do you. I will. But they both knew he wouldn't, not really. There'd be damage to assess, investigations into the fire's cause, families to help who'd lost stored grain. Elena caught his wrist as he started to stand. Colt, thank you. For what? For caring that I was bleeding. He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, quick, almost impersonal, but it sent heat through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Get some sleep, he said, and left before she could respond. Elena lay in bed, hands throbbing, and touched her forehead where his lips had been. It wasn't their first kiss. That had been the awkward brush of mouths at their wedding, but it was the first one that felt like it meant something. She was in trouble, the kind of trouble that had nothing to do with fires or fights or the harsh frontier, the kind that came from starting to care about a man she'd promised herself she'd never love. The next weeks blurred together, Red Hollow rebuilt. Elena's hands healed, leaving faint scars that would mark her forever as someone who'd fought for this place. And the careful distance she'd maintained with Mercer continued crumbling. She caught herself watching him more, noticed when he came home tired or tense, started leaving coffee ready when she knew he'd be late. Small gestures that felt monumental, each one a brick in a bridge she wasn't sure she wanted to build. Mercer noticed too she'd catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, mixed with wariness. Like he was afraid to believe she might actually be softening toward him. They still hadn't crossed certain lines, still slept on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to touch, still maintained a formality that kept things safe, but the space between them felt charged now, full of unspoken possibilities. Then came the day Victoria Hale pushed too far. Elena was at the general store when Victoria swept in with two friends, both wealthy ranchers' wives, both looking for entertainment at someone else's expense. Mrs. Mercer, Victoria greeted her with false sweetness. Still playing house, I see. Elena ignored her, focusing on the fabric Sarah was showing her. I heard about the fire, Victoria continued. How brave of you to risk yourself for a warehouse full of grain, though I suppose when you come from nothing, any property seems worth saving. The other women tittered. Elena kept her expression neutral. Of course, we all know why you really did it. Victoria moved closer, voice dropping to a stage whisper. Trying to prove yourself worthy of the sheriff, trying to make people forget you're just a bought bride who trapped a good man. Something snapped in Elena. She turned slowly, faced Victoria with a calm that felt like ice. You're right, she said clearly. I am a bought bride. My father sold me to pay his debts, and Colt Mercer collected. That's the truth, and I've never pretended otherwise. Victoria's smile widened, scenting victory. But here's what you don't understand, Elena continued. I fought that fire because Red Hollow's my home now. I tend to the sheriff's wounds because that's what a wife does. And I stand here listening to your petty insults because walking away would suggest I care what you think. She stepped closer, dropped her own voice. You've spent months trying to make me feel small, trying to remind me I don't belong. But the thing is, Victoria, I've survived worse than you. I've lost everything, rebuilt from nothing, and learned to hold my ground in a place that eats weak people alive. What exactly have you survived besides boredom? Victoria's face went red. How dare you? I dare because I'm done being polite. Elena felt Sarah's silent support beside her, other customers listening now. You want to know the difference between us? I earned my place here. You just married into yours. So unless you've got something useful to say, stop wasting my time. She turned back to Sarah. I'll take 3 yards of the blue, please. Victoria sputtered, trying to form a response. Her friends looked uncertain. The dynamic shifted. Finally, Victoria swept out in a fury of expensive fabric and wounded pride. The store was silent for a beat. Then someone in the back started clapping. Others joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Sarah grinned and wrapped Elena's fabric. "That's been coming for months," Sarah said quietly. "Well done." Elena's hands were shaking, adrenaline catching up. She'd just made a powerful enemy. Victoria Hale wasn't the type to forgive being humiliated publicly, but she'd also just stopped being afraid. The story reached Mercer before Elena got home. She found him in the kitchen, attempting to make dinner and failing based on the smell. "Heard you had an interesting afternoon," he said, not looking up from whatever he was burning. "Word travels fast." "In this town?" "Always." He abandoned the pan, turned to face her. "Victoria Hale's husband came to see me. Seems his wife is upset." Elena's stomach dropped. "He complained." "He apologized." Mercer's mouth twitched. "Said his wife's been needing someone to stand up to her for years. Asked me to thank you for the entertainment." Relief flooded through her. "So I'm not in trouble? For defending yourself?" "No." He moved closer, studied her face. "But you made an enemy today. Victoria's not the forgiving type." "I know." "Can you handle that?" Elena thought about the question. 6 months ago, the answer would have been no. But she wasn't the same woman who'd arrived on that stagecoach, terrified and desperate. "Yes," she said, "I can handle it." "Handle?" Mercer nodded slowly. Then, surprising her completely, he pulled her into a hug. It was brief, almost awkward. They'd never embraced before, not really. But his arms were solid around her, and for a moment Elena let herself lean into him. "I'm proud of you," he said against her hair. The words did something to her chest, tightened something that had been loose. She pulled back enough to look at his face. "Why?" "Because you're not the woman I brought here." His eyes were serious. "You're stronger, braver. You became who this place needed you to be." "Maybe this place became what I needed too," Elena heard herself say. Something flared in Mercer's expression, heat and hope and hunger all tangled together. His hand came up, cupped her jaw with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Elena," he said, her name a question. She could pull back, should pull back. They'd maintained this careful distance for months, and crossing that line would change everything. But she was tired of being careful, tired of pretending she didn't notice how he looked at her, tired of lying about the way her heart kicked when he smiled. So instead of pulling back, she leaned in. The kiss was nothing like their wedding. No witnesses, no obligation, just want and choice and months of tension finally breaking. Mercer kissed like he fought, intense and focused, all his attention narrowed to this moment. His other hand found her waist, pulled her closer. Elena's wrapped in bandages, hands came up to his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. This was dangerous. This was stupid. This was... The door burst open. They broke apart instantly. A young boy stood in the doorway, breathless and wild-eyed. "Sheriff, you gotta come quick. There's men, armed men, riding in from the east, lots of them." Mercer's entire demeanor shifted in a heartbeat. The gentleman kissing his wife disappeared, replaced by the cold sheriff. "How many?" he demanded. 8, maybe 10. They got rifles. Get everyone inside. Lock doors." Mercer was already moving, grabbing his gun belt, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. "Find James Chen. Tell him to organize the men who can shoot. Move." The boy ran. Mercer turned to Elena, his face hard. "Get in the bedroom. Stay away from windows. Don't come out until I come get you." "Colt?" "Elena, please." The word cost him. "I can't focus if I'm worried about you. I need you safe." She wanted to argue, but she saw the fear beneath his command, understood what he wasn't saying, so she nodded. He kissed her once more, quick and fierce. "Stay alive." Then he was gone, boots pounding down the street, shouting orders. Elena stood frozen for a moment before her training kicked in. She grabbed the rifle Mercer had taught her to use, checked it was loaded, and retreated to the bedroom. Through the window, she could see armed men gathering at the edge of town. Even from here, she could tell this wasn't random. This was planned, organized. This was revenge. One of the riders moved forward, tall, dark-haired, with a face that suggested violence came easy. He stopped in the middle of Main Street, clearly visible. "Colt Mercer," his voice carried across the town. "You got something that belongs to us. Come out and we'll talk. Mercer appeared from the jail, walking alone down the center of the street. Elena's heart stopped. He looked impossibly small against 10 armed men, but he moved with the same cold confidence he always did. "Silas Kane," Mercer said, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Thought you were still in prison. Got out early. Good behavior." The man, Silas, grinned. "We got business, Sheriff. You killed my brothers. Think that deserves a response." The brothers. Elena's mind raced back to the stagecoach ambush. The men Mercer had killed saving her. These were their family, come for revenge. Because of her. "Your brothers attacked a stagecoach," Mercer said. "Killed a driver. They got what they deserved." "See, that's where we disagree." Silas dismounted, hand resting on his gun. "I think you murdered them, and I think you need to pay for that. Then face me. Leave the town out of it. Oh, I'll face you, but first—" Silas's grin widened. "I want the woman, the one on that stagecoach. Your pretty new wife. Heard you married her. Romantic story." Elena's blood went cold. "That's not happening," Mercer said flatly. "Figured you'd say that." Silas gestured, and 2 of his men spurred their horses forward. "So we'll just take her ourselves." They rode straight for Mercer's house. Elena watched them coming, rifle in her shaking hands. She could hide, let them search. She could shoot, try to defend herself, or she could... She made a decision. Opening the door, Elena stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. The riders pulled up short, surprised. "Looking for me?" she called out. From the street, she heard Mercer shout her name, furious and terrified. But Elena kept the rifle steady, aimed at the closer rider. "Tell your boss I'm not hiding," she said. "But I'm not going quietly either." The riders exchanged glances. One started to dismount. Elena fired. The shot went wide, intentionally. She wasn't trying to kill, just prove she'd fight. The riders' horses spooked, rearing. In the chaos, one rider lost his seat, hit the ground hard. More gunfire erupted from various buildings. James Chen and the other townsmen had positioned themselves, were firing at the gang from cover. Silas's men returned fire, but they were exposed, disadvantaged. Mercer used the distraction. He moved like liquid violence, drew and fired in one smooth motion. 2 of Silas's men dropped. Another took cover behind a water trough. It became chaos. Bullets everywhere, people screaming, horses panicking. Elena retreated into the house, reloaded, fired through the window at anyone who moved toward them. One of Silas's men made it to the porch. Elena met him at the door with the rifle butt, smashed it into his face. He went down cursing, grabbed for her ankle. She kicked him hard, raised the rifle to shoot. Mercer appeared, put a bullet in the man's shoulder. "I told you to stay inside. They were coming for me anyway." No time to argue. They fought together, Mercer covering the front while Elena watched the back. The house became their fortress, bullet holes appearing in walls, glass shattering. Through it all, Elena felt strangely calm. Fear was there, yes, but buried under determination. These men wanted to hurt her, hurt Mercer, hurt her town. She wouldn't let them. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Silas's men realized they were outmatched. Too many defenders, too much crossfire. 3 were dead, 2 injured. The rest started retreating, all except Silas. He grabbed a torch from somewhere, lit it, and hurled it onto the roof of the general store. Flames caught immediately, spreading fast. "Now you choose," he shouted at Mercer. "Chase me or save your town. Can't do both." He spurred his horse, riding hard toward the canyon. Mercer stood torn, watching fire spread across the store while Silas escaped. Elena saw the war on his face, duty versus vengeance, protecting what was here versus stopping the threat. "Go," she told him. "I'll help with the fire." "Elena, go. Before he gets away." She pushed him toward his horse. "I'm not helpless. Go." Mercer looked at her, something fierce and grateful in his eyes. Then he mounted Smoke and took off after Silas Kane, leaving Elena to fight yet another fire in Red Hollow. This time, the town was ready. The bucket brigade formed faster, worked more efficiently. They had the fire contained within an hour, limited the damage to the store and one adjacent building. Elena worked until her fresh bandages were soaked through with blood from reopened blisters. She worked until her lungs burned from smoke. She worked until Sarah forcibly pulled her aside. "Enough," Sarah said. You've done enough. Rest. Elena collapsed against the side of a building, watching townspeople continue the fight. Her town. Her people. She'd helped save them. But Mercer still hadn't returned. Hours passed. Darkness fell. The fire was fully out, damage being assessed. Still no Mercer. Elena sat on the porch of their house, rifle across her lap, waiting, trying not to imagine what could have delayed him, trying not to think about Silas Kane's reputation for cruelty. Near midnight, she heard hoofbeats. Smoke appeared from the darkness, moving slow and tired. Mercer sat slumped in the saddle, but alive. Alive and alone. Elena ran to meet him. He dismounted with difficulty, nearly fell. She caught him, felt blood soaking through his shirt. How bad? She demanded. Not bad, just tired. But his voice was wrong, strained. She got him inside, into the light. Blood spread from a wound in his side. Bullet had grazed him, torn through flesh, but missed anything vital. His hands were torn up from rough riding, and his face carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd done something terrible and necessary. Silas? Elena asked while she worked to expose the wound. Dead. Flat, final. She cleaned the bullet graze, stitched it with hands steadier than she felt. Mercer sat silent through it all, staring at nothing. When she was done, he finally looked at her. You disobeyed a direct order. I saved my own life. You risked it. So did you. Elena met his eyes. We both did what needed doing. Mercer's hand came up, cupped her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, came away sooty. You fought like you belonged here. I do belong here. Something shifted in his expression. Yes, you do. He kissed her then, tasting of blood and smoke and survival. Elena kissed back, all the fear and relief and terrible joy of being alive pouring into it. When they broke apart, Mercer rested his forehead against hers. I was terrified, he admitted. When I saw you on that porch with your rifle facing those men, I thought I'd lose you. You didn't. But I could have. I brought you here, put you in danger. Stop. Elena pulled back enough to look at him. You gave me a life. A real one. Dangerous, yes. Hard, but real. And I'm grateful for it. Elena. I'm not finished. She took a breath. I was angry for so long. Felt trapped. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being a cage and became a home. And you stopped being my captor and became... She trailed off, not quite ready to finish that sentence. Mercer finished it for her. Became what? Someone I care about, she admitted. Someone I don't want to lose. His eyes went dark with emotion. I've cared about you since before we met. That photograph your father showed me, I kept thinking about you. Wondering if I could give you something better than the life waiting for you back east. So this whole thing, the contract, the manipulation, was what? Some misguided rescue? It was me being selfish. His honesty was brutal. Wanting you and finding a way to make it happen. Your father's debt was real, the contract legal, but I could have collected cash. I didn't have to demand you. I chose to because I wanted you for myself. The confession should have angered her. Instead, it settled something that had been unsettled. At least now she knew the truth, all of it. That's incredibly controlling, she said. I know. And arrogant. I know. And I should probably hate you for it. Probably. His voice was rough. Do you? Elena thought about the question, considered her answer carefully. No, she finally said. I don't hate you. I don't even know if I'm angry anymore. I think maybe I'm just glad I ended up here. With you. Even if the path was terrible. Mercer closed his eyes briefly, like her words had hit him physically. When he opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears if he was a man who cried. I don't deserve you, he said. No, you don't. Elena smiled slightly. But you're stuck with me anyway. This time when he kissed her, it was different, slower, deeper, full of promise. Elena kissed back, tasted possibility. Her hands found his chest, felt his heart beating beneath her palms. Alive. They were both alive. We should sleep, Mercer said against her mouth. We should, Elena agreed. Neither of them moved. Finally, Mercer pulled back. I'm bleeding on you. I don't care. I do. Come on. He led her to the bedroom, both of them exhausted beyond words. They cleaned up as best they could, collapsed onto the bed still partially dressed. For the first time, they didn't stay on separate sides. Mercer pulled Elena against him, careful of his wounds. She went willingly, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. This is new, she murmured. Good new or bad new? Good new. Elena closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat. Definitely good new. They fell asleep tangled together, survivors of violence and fire and their own stubborn pride. Outside, Red Hollow slept too, damaged but standing. A frontier town that had fought off raiders and lived to see another day. And in the small house at the edge of town, a marriage that had started with debt and desperation quietly transformed into something neither of them had expected. Something that looked suspiciously like love. Morning light came too bright through the window, finding Elena wrapped around Mercer like she'd been doing it for years instead of one night. She woke slowly, aware of warmth and the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek. His arm was still around her shoulders, holding her close even in sleep. She should move, create distance before this became complicated. But her body refused to cooperate, too comfortable to care about complications. Mercer stirred, his hand tightening briefly on her shoulder before his eyes opened. For a moment, they just looked at each other, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Morning, he said, his voice rough from sleep. Morning. Elena didn't move. How's your side? Hurts. He shifted slightly, winced. But I've had worse. That's not reassuring. His mouth twitched. Wasn't meant to be. They lay there in comfortable silence until practical matters intruded. Mercer needed fresh bandages. Elena needed to check on the town's damage from last night. The world required their attention whether they wanted to give it or not. But first, Mercer caught her hand as she started to rise. Elena, about what I said last night. You mean the part where you admitted to manipulating my entire life because you wanted me? He flinched. Yes, that part. Elena considered her response carefully. In daylight, with clarity, she could be angry about it. Should be angry. But anger felt exhausting, and she was tired of carrying it. I'm not saying it was right, she said slowly. What you did, the contract, the setup, it was controlling and arrogant and a dozen other things I could list if I wanted to waste the energy. But it brought me here, to this life, this town, this... She gestured between them. Whatever this is becoming, and I can either spend the rest of my life resenting how I arrived, or I can accept it and move forward. Mercer's eyes searched her face. You're sure? No? Elena's honesty surprised them both. I'm not sure about anything except that hating you takes more effort than I want to spend. And last night, when I thought you might not come back, her voice caught. I realized I'd rather have you here, flaws and manipulation and all, than not have you at all. Something in his expression cracked open. He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like morning and promise and relief. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I don't deserve that, he said. Probably not, but I'm giving it anyway. Elena pulled back, managed a small smile. Don't make me regret it. I'll try not to. They rose and dressed, fell into the familiar rhythm of morning routines. But everything felt different now. The casual touches as they moved around each other, the way Mercer's eyes followed her, the warmth in Elena's chest when he smiled. Outside, Red Hollow was assessing damage. The general store had lost its roof and most of the front wall. 2 other buildings showed bullet holes and minor fire damage. And there were 4 bodies laid out in front of the jail, Silas Kane's men who hadn't survived. Mercer spent the morning organizing burials, taking statements, documenting everything for the territorial marshal's office. Elena helped where she could, but mostly she found herself at the ruins of the general store with Sarah and James. Could have been worse, James said, surveying the wreckage. Structure's still sound. We can rebuild. Will you? Elena asked. Or will you leave? Sarah looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Leave? This is our home. Takes more than a gang of thugs to run us off. She squeezed Elena's hand. Besides, where else would I find a friend who punches armed men with a rifle butt? Elena laughed despite herself. That was stupid. That was brave. Sarah started picking through salvageable goods. You fought for this town like it was yours. People noticed. They had noticed. All morning, townspeople had been nodding to Elena, offering thanks for her help during the fire. Even the butcher's wife, previously cold, had stopped to say her husband was grateful Elena had defended the town. The shift was subtle but real. She wasn't just the sheriff's bought bride anymore. She'd earned her place through action. Victoria Hale, predictably, had a different take. She appeared at midday with her husband Samuel in tow, surveying the damage with barely concealed satisfaction. "What a mess," Victoria said loudly. "This is what happens when the law attracts violence. Perhaps we need new leadership." Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Victoria, now's not the time." "It's exactly the time." She turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. "How many more attacks before we admit Sheriff Mercer brings more danger than protection? His vendetta with that gang cost us a store, nearly cost us lives." Elena felt anger rise hot in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but Mercer's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Mrs. Hale," he said calmly, "those men came for revenge because I stopped them from robbing a stagecoach and killing innocent people. Would you prefer I'd let them succeed? I prefer a sheriff who doesn't make enemies that follow him here." "Then you want a coward." Mercer's voice stayed level. "Someone who looks the other way when crimes happen outside town limits. That's not me, and it never will be." "Then maybe it should be someone else entirely." Victoria's face flushed. "I'm calling for a town meeting. Let people vote on whether they want you to stay sheriff." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Samuel Hale looked like he wanted to disappear. Mercer's expression revealed nothing, but Elena felt the tension in his shoulders. "That's your right," Mercer said. "Meeting hall, tonight at 7. I'll be there." Victoria looked surprised he'd agreed so easily. She'd probably hoped he'd argue, give her more ammunition. Instead, he'd called her bluff. "Fine," she said. "We'll see what the town really thinks." She swept away, Samuel trailing apologetically behind. The crowd dispersed slowly, people whispering. Elena waited until they were relatively alone before turning to Mercer. "You're not worried." "Terrified." His admission was quiet. "If they vote me out, I lose the job. The house comes with the position. We'd have to leave." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on fighting for Red Hollow, she hadn't considered they might lose it anyway. "Where would we go?" "I don't know." Mercer looked at the mountains in the distance. "I've been sheriff here for 6 years. It's the only home I've known since the war." The vulnerability in his voice made Elena's chest ache. This hard man who'd survived so much, afraid of losing the one place he belonged. "Then we fight," she said firmly. "We make them remember why they need you." "How?" Elena thought fast. "Sarah, James, the people who know what you've done for this town. We get them to speak tonight, remind everyone of the times you've saved lives, stopped violence, kept them safe." "That feels like begging. That feels like showing them the truth." Elena grabbed his hand. "You're too proud to defend yourself properly, so let the rest of us do it." Mercer looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "When did you become so fierce?" "Somewhere between the stagecoach and the gunfight," Elena managed to smile. "You created a monster." "No." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I just gave you room to become who you already were." The words settled something in Elena, confirmed what she'd been slowly realizing. She wasn't a different person here. She was more herself than she'd ever been allowed to be back east. They spent the afternoon quietly campaigning, not openly, that would seem desperate, but reminding key people of Mercer's history. Sarah spread the word among the women. James talked to the business owners. And slowly, a counter-narrative began building. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, the meeting hall was packed. Elena sat in the front row, Sarah beside her. Mercer stood to the side, face carefully neutral. Victoria Hale sat opposite with her supporters, fewer than Elena expected, but vocal. Mayor Thompson, a weathered rancher who mostly let Mercer run things, called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss Sheriff Mercer's position. Mrs. Hale has raised concerns. Sheriff, would you like to speak first?" Mercer stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable in front of the crowd, more at ease facing armed men than public speaking. "I'm not good with words," he started. "So I'll keep this simple. I've been your sheriff for 6 years. In that time, I've stopped 3 bank robberies, run off 2 gangs trying to establish territory here, and kept the peace as best I could. I've been shot 4 times, stabbed twice, and broken more bones than I can count doing this job." He paused, jaw working. "Yesterday, men came here for revenge against me. Mrs. Hale is right about that. My actions brought them. But my actions also saved a stagecoach full of innocent people, including my wife. And when they came seeking vengeance, we fought them off together. This town fought." His eyes scanned the crowd. "I can't promise that being sheriff won't bring danger. This territory's too wild for that promise. But I can promise I'll always stand between that danger and you. That's the job. That's what I do. If you want someone else to do it, I'll step aside. But understand what you're asking for. Someone who avoids trouble rather than confronting it. That kind of sheriff won't keep you safe. They'll just keep you comfortable until the next gang rides through unopposed." He stepped back. The hall was silent. Victoria stood immediately. "Beautiful speech. But words don't rebuild our store. Words don't stop bullets. Sheriff Mercer is a magnet for violence, and that's horseshit, Victoria." Everyone turned. Old Tom Brady, the man who ran the livery, had stood up. He rarely spoke at meetings, usually just voted and left. "6 years ago, my daughter was traveling back from Denver when her stage got hit by bandits," Tom said. "Colt rode out alone, tracked them for 3 days, and brought her back alive. Could have died doing it. Nearly did. But he brought my Sarah home." A woman in the back stood. "My husband was drunk, threatening to burn down the house with us in it. Sheriff talked him down, got him sober, saved our marriage." Another voice. "He stopped those miners from lynching that Chinese family when someone claimed they'd stolen gold." More people stood, sharing stories. Times Mercer had helped, protected, saved. The tide was shifting, and Elena watched Victoria's face grow tighter with each testimony. Then Sarah stood. "I'm from San Francisco originally. Come here to start fresh with James. We knew it would be hard, knew people might not accept us. But Sheriff Mercer made it clear, anyone who harassed us for being Chinese would answer to him. We've been safe here because of him. And his wife," Sarah looked at Elena, "fought beside us yesterday. Saved lives. They're part of this town, same as anyone." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't realized how much acceptance mattered until it was being offered so openly. The testimonies continued. By the time they finished, even Victoria's supporters looked uncertain. Mayor Thompson called for a vote. "All in favor of Sheriff Mercer keeping his position?" A forest of hands rose. Elena counted quickly, at least 3/4 of the room. "Opposed?" Victoria's hand shot up. A few others joined her, but it was a clear minority. "Motion fails," Mayor Thompson said. "Sheriff Mercer retains his position." Relief flooded through Elena. Across the room, Mercer's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his expression remained controlled. Victoria stood abruptly. "This is a mistake. When the next gang comes, when more people die, remember you chose this." She stormed out, Samuel following with apologetic glances. The meeting dissolved into conversation, people approaching Mercer to shake his hand, offer support. Elena waited until the crowd thinned before approaching him. "How do you feel?" "Like I need to live up to what they just said about me." He looked exhausted. "Come on, let's go home." The walk back through Red Hollow's dark streets was quiet. Overhead, stars blazed in unfamiliar patterns. Elena had learned some of the frontier constellations over the months, but they still looked strange compared to the limited stars visible through Philadelphia's smoke and buildings. At the house, they found an envelope tucked under the door. Mercer opened it, scanned the contents, and went very still. "What is it?" Elena asked. He handed it to her without speaking. The letter was from a Philadelphia law firm. Elena's hands started shaking before she finished the first paragraph. Her father's estate, which she'd believed completely depleted, had included a life insurance policy no one knew about. The payout had been held up in legal complications, but was now resolved. The sum listed made her dizzy. $35,000. A fortune. More than enough to pay off every debt her father had ever incurred. More than enough to buy her freedom. "The contract," she said slowly. "The debt Mercer used to justify their arrangement. This would cover it. Completely." Mercer's face was unreadable. "Yes. Which means..." Elena's voice trailed off. "Which means you don't owe me anything anymore." Mercer moved to the window, stared out at nothing. You could leave. Go back east. Start over with actual money this time. The marriage, we could annul it, claim it was under duress. No one would argue. The possibility hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Everything Elena had wanted when she first arrived, freedom, money, escape, was suddenly within reach. She looked at Mercer's rigid back, remembered him fighting beside her yesterday, remembered the way he held her last night, the small moments over months that had built something neither of them had planned. Is that what you want? She asked quietly. For me to leave? His shoulders tensed further. What I want doesn't matter. You never chose this. I took your choice away. This money, it gives it back. That's not an answer. No. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression nearly broke her. I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, build a life here, grow old in this frustrating town. I want mornings waking up next to you and nights falling asleep the same way. I want everything we started becoming last night. But I won't trap you again. His voice was rough. You deserve the choice I never gave you, so if you want to go, take the money and go. I won't stop you, won't guilt you, won't make it harder than it needs to be. Elena's heart was hammering. And if I stay? Then stay because you want to. Not because you're trapped. Not because you feel obligated. Not because of the contract or the debt or anything except honest choice. The words were everything she'd needed to hear 6 months ago. Now they felt like a test she hadn't studied for. I need time, she heard herself say. To think. Pain flickered across Mercer's face, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. The money's yours either way. He grabbed his coat, headed for the door. I'll sleep at the jail tonight, give you space. Colt, please, I can't. I need space too. He left before she could argue, the door closing with careful gentleness. Elena stood alone in the small house that had become her home, holding a letter that offered everything her 18-year-old self had dreamed of. Money. Freedom. A chance to return to civilization. She should be thrilled. Instead, she felt hollow. She spent a sleepless night staring at that letter, weighing possibilities. With that money, she could return to Philadelphia, rent a nice apartment, live comfortably while pursuing her writing, never worry about finances again. But Philadelphia meant corsets and calling cards and the suffocating weight of propriety. It meant being alone in crowds, pretending to care about things that didn't matter. It meant a life that had never actually fit her, even when she thought it did. Red Hollow meant danger and hardship and a social structure that still looked at her sideways sometimes. It meant brutal winters and a husband who'd manipulated her into marriage. But it also meant Sarah's friendship and the satisfaction of fighting fires and the knowledge that she mattered here, that her actions had weight, that she'd become someone stronger, braver, more real than the pale shadow she'd been back east. And it meant Colt. Complicated, scarred, impossible Colt, who read poetry and killed efficiently and looked at her like she was something precious he couldn't believe he got to keep. At dawn, Elena made her decision. She found Mercer at the jail, asleep at his desk with his head on his arms. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd clearly spent the night as sleepless as hers. Colt, she said softly. He jerked awake, reached for his gun before recognizing her. Elena, what? I'm staying. The words hung between them. Mercer stared at her like he'd misheard. What? I'm staying, here, with you. Elena moved closer. Not because I'm trapped, not because of debt, because I choose to. Elena, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's the point. She sat on the edge of his desk. You gave me a choice. I'm making it. I'm choosing this life, this town, this marriage. You. Mercer's eyes searched her face. Why? Because yesterday when you rode after Silas Kane, I was terrified you wouldn't come back. Because last night sleeping next to you felt more like home than anywhere I've lived. Because... She took a breath. Because somewhere in the last 7 months, I fell in love with you, and I'm tired of pretending I haven't. The confession hit him visibly. He stood slowly, moved to stand in front of her. His hands came up to frame her face with the same gentleness he used for fragile things. Say that again, he said, voice rough. I love you. Easier the second time. I love your terrible coffee and your Byron obsession and the way you give away your coat to people who need it more. I love that you fight for this town even when they don't appreciate it. I love who I've become because you dragged me out here and forced me to be stronger. Elena, I'm not finished. She covered his hands with hers. I love you despite the manipulation, despite the contract, despite everything that should make me hate you. And I'm choosing to stay not because leaving is hard, but because leaving would mean losing the best thing that ever happened to me. Mercer's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't deserve you. No, you don't, but I'm staying anyway. Elena smiled. You're stuck with me, Sheriff Mercer. Better get used to it. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of relief. Elena kissed back, tasted salt from tears she couldn't tell were his or hers. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said. I've loved you since that photograph. Loved you more when you stepped off that stagecoach furious and terrified. Loved you through every fight and every moment you hated me. I'll love you until I stop breathing. That's dramatic. I'm feeling dramatic. He pulled back enough to look at her. You're sure? About staying? I'm sure about you. The rest we'll figure out. Elena stood, took his hand. Come home. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. Then let's fix that. They walked back through Red Hollow's morning streets hand in hand. A few early risers were out, stared at them with curiosity. Let them stare. Elena was done caring what people thought. At the house, they collapsed into bed, still dressed, too exhausted for anything except sleep. But this time there was no careful distance, no separate sides. Mercer pulled Elena close, she curled into him, and they slept tangled together like they'd been doing it for years. When Elena woke hours later, the first thing she saw was Mercer watching her with soft eyes. How long have you been awake? She asked. A while. Didn't want to move and wake you. Sentimental. Maybe. His hand traced idle patterns on her shoulder. I keep thinking I'll wake up and find out this was a dream, that you actually left. Not a dream. I'm here. Elena pressed a kiss to his jaw. And I'm not going anywhere. Good. His arms tightened around her. Because I have plans. Plans? For us. For this life. He shifted to look at her properly. I know being a sheriff's wife isn't glamorous. The pay's terrible. The hour's worse. But maybe we could make it something more. You could write like you wanted. I could actually use that medical training, help people beyond just shooting threats. We could build something here. Elena heard the hope in his voice, fragile but real. What kind of something? A real home. A family, eventually, if you want that. A life we both chose instead of one forced on us. The vision he painted was so different from anything she'd imagined back in Philadelphia. Smaller in scope, but larger in meaning. A life built on partnership and purpose instead of obligation and appearance. I want that, she said. All of it. Mercer kissed her, slow and sweet. Then let's start building. They rose eventually, the day requiring attention they'd delayed, but something had fundamentally shifted. They moved around each other with easy intimacy now, no careful distance, touched freely, smiled more. The money from Philadelphia arrived 3 weeks later. Elena stared at the bank draft, still boggling at the amount. Mercer found her at the kitchen table, turning it over in her hands. Having second thoughts? He asked carefully. No, just thinking. Elena set the draft down. This is more money than I ever imagined having. We could do a lot with it. We? Yes, we. She pulled him into the chair beside her. It's my money, legally, but we're married, partners, so I want your input. Mercer studied the draft. What are you thinking? The general store. Sarah and James are struggling to rebuild. What if we help them? Not charity, a loan with fair terms. And the school, this town needs one. I could teach, but we'd need a building. Elena's ideas were spilling out faster now. And your medical training. We could set up a proper clinic. Nothing fancy, but basic care for people who can't afford doctors. She looked at Mercer nervously. Or is that stupid? Maybe I should save it, or... It's perfect. His voice was rough with emotion. You want to invest in Red Hollow. I want to invest in our home. Elena squeezed his hand. This place gave me a future when I thought I had none. Seems right to give something back. Mercer pulled her into his lap, kissed her thoroughly. Have I mentioned I love you? Once or twice, Elena grinned against his mouth. But I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, and your generous heart, and your brilliant mind. He punctuated each statement with a kiss. And I'm grateful every day that you chose to stay. Best decision I ever made. They spent the next months putting plans into action. Sarah and James's store was rebuilt better than before, with Elena's money funding materials and skilled labor. The school building rose on the edge of town, small but solid, with space for 30 students. And Mercer converted a corner of the jail into a basic medical clinic, dusting off knowledge he'd buried for years. Elena threw herself into teaching, discovered she loved it. The frontier children were sharp and hungry for learning, their questions keeping her on her toes. She taught reading and writing and basic mathematics, but also practical skills: how to research, how to think critically, how to question assumptions. She was shaping the next generation of Red Hollow, and the responsibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Mercer balanced sheriffing with medicine, finding satisfaction in healing he'd forgotten was possible. He set bones, stitched wounds, delivered babies. The violence was still part of his job. The territory was too wild for that to change. But now it wasn't the only thing. Evenings, they'd sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just existed in comfortable silence. Both were good. Do you ever regret it? Mercer asked one night. Staying. Elena considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss things about Philadelphia. Good restaurants, theater, bookstores with more than 3 books. She leaned into his shoulder. But no, I don't regret staying. This life, it's harder, but it's real. And it's mine in a way nothing back east ever was. Ours, Mercer corrected gently. It's ours. Ours, Elena agreed. Winter came again, fierce and familiar. But this time Elena faced it with confidence, knowing she could survive. She'd survived worse, after all. Stagecoach ambushes and forced marriages and gunfights in the streets. This winter she had a home, a husband she loved, a purpose that mattered. The storms could rage. She'd built something strong enough to weather them. On a particularly brutal February night, snowbound and restless, Mercer found Elena writing by lamplight. What's that? He asked, reading over her shoulder. A story. Elena didn't stop writing. About a woman who came west expecting to die and found out she could live instead. Sounds familiar. It's fiction. She glanced up at him. Mostly. Mercer read a few lines, smiled. You're good at this. Really good. You think so? I know so. He kissed the top of her head. You should submit it. There are magazines that publish frontier stories. Elena had thought about it but hadn't quite found the courage. What if they reject it? Then you write another one, and another, until one sticks. He pulled up a chair beside her. You taught me I could heal again. Let me teach you to be brave about this. So she finished the story, polished it until the words gleamed, sent it to a magazine in San Francisco with a prayer and no expectations. 3 months later, an acceptance letter arrived with payment. Not much, $20, but it was validation, proof that her words mattered beyond Red Hollow. Elena framed that letter, hung it above her desk. A reminder that the dreams she'd abandoned in Philadelphia weren't dead, just waiting for her to become brave enough to pursue them. More stories followed, more acceptances. Her name, Elena Mercer, started appearing in periodicals, small but steady. She wrote about the frontier, about women who survived impossible things, about finding home in unexpected places. She wrote her truth, and people read it. You're famous, Sarah teased one afternoon, waving a magazine with Elena's latest story. Hardly, but it's satisfying. It's more than satisfying. You're showing people what life is really like out here. Not romantic nonsense, but truth. Sarah studied her friend. You happy? Elena thought about the question. Was she happy? Her hands were calloused from work. Her dresses were simple and often mended. She lived in a small house in a frontier town where violence was always a possibility. But she woke up next to a man who loved her, taught children who looked at her with respect, wrote stories that mattered, built a life that was entirely, genuinely hers. Yes, she said simply. I'm happy. And she was. Deeply, surprisingly, completely happy in a way she'd never been in Philadelphia with all its comforts. Because happiness, she'd learned, wasn't about ease or safety or following expected paths. It was about choice, about becoming who you were meant to be, even if the journey to get there was brutal. Red Hollow had given her that. Colt had given her that, in his fumbling, manipulative, ultimately loving way. She'd arrived as a bought bride, trapped and furious. She'd become a teacher, a writer, a wife by choice, a woman who could fight fires and stare down armed men and build something meaningful from nothing. The frontier had demanded she become strong. She'd exceeded the demand. And standing on her porch that evening, watching Colt ride back from checking on distant homesteads, Elena realized something profound. The debt that had brought her here was long paid. The contract that had bound them was legally void, but the bonds between them now, forged in violence and survival and gradual, stubborn love, those would hold forever. Not because they had to, but because they wanted them to. Colt dismounted, climbed the porch steps, pulled her into his arms without a word. She went willingly, breathed in the smell of leather and horse and him. "Missed you," he murmured against her hair. "You were gone 3 hours." "Still missed you." Elena pulled back to look at his face, memorized the lines that deepened when he smiled, the scars that told stories he'd slowly shared with her over months. This hard man who'd made terrible choices in service of impossible love. "I love you," she said. Simple, true. "I love you too." He kissed her forehead. "How was your day?" "Good. Taught the Henderson girl to read. She's bright. Going to be something special." "Like her teacher," Elena smiled. "Flatterer." "Honest man." He held her closer. "Come inside. I'm starving, and you're the only one who can cook worth a damn." "Romantic. I try. They went inside together, into the small house that held their life. That night they'd eat dinner at the scarred kitchen table. Later, they'd lie in bed talking about everything and nothing. And eventually they'd sleep tangled together, safe in the knowledge that they'd chosen this. Every day they chose it, and that choosing made all the difference. 3 years after Elena chose to stay, Red Hollow had transformed into something neither of them had quite expected. The school now held 42 students, bursting at the seams. Elena had trained 2 assistant teachers, young women from homesteading families who'd shown aptitude and hunger for learning. The general store had expanded twice, and Mercer's medical practice had grown so demanding he'd deputized 2 men to help with sheriffing duties, freeing him to focus on healing more than enforcement. The town council had started calling it the Red Hollow Revival, crediting the sheriff and his wife for breathing new life into what had been a dying settlement. Elena found the praise embarrassing. Mercer found it useful, harder to vote him out when people thought he'd saved the town. But success brought new complications. The territorial governor's office had taken notice of Red Hollow's growth, sent representatives to assess its potential for official township status. With that designation came funding, infrastructure, legitimacy. It also came with oversight, regulations, and the kind of bureaucratic interference Mercer despised. "They want to appoint a marshal," he told Elena one evening, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. "Someone from the territorial office to assist with law enforcement, which means someone to watch me, make sure I'm following their rules." Elena looked up from grading papers. "Would that be so terrible?" "Yes." Mercer paced their small kitchen like a caged animal. "I've kept this town safe my way for 9 years. Now some politician who's never faced down an armed drunk wants to tell me how to do my job? Or maybe they want to help, give you resources you don't have. I don't need their resources. I need them to leave me alone." Elena set down her pen. She recognized this mood. Mercer bristling against authority, against change, against anything that threatened his control. It was the same stubbornness that had led him to manipulate her arrival, the same fierce independence that made him effective but difficult. "Colt, the town's growing. We can't stay small and informal forever. Eventually, we need structure. Structure's just another word for bureaucracy killing common sense." He stopped pacing, looked at her. "You think I'm being unreasonable. I think you're being scared." Elena stood, moved to him. "Change is terrifying, but it's also inevitable. We can fight it and lose or adapt and survive." His jaw worked. "I don't know how to adapt. I know how to fight. Then learn. You learn to heal again. You learn to let me in. She took his hands. You can learn this too. The territorial marshal arrived 2 weeks later, a man named Daniel Cross, mid-40s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen violence but preferred avoiding it. He was polite, professional, and clearly bemused by Red Hollow's informal approach to law enforcement. You don't keep arrest records? Cross asked, reviewing Mercer's sparse documentation. I remember who I've arrested. Don't need to write it down. The territorial office requires written records for legal proceedings, appeals, oversight. Mercer's expression could have frozen water. Never needed it before. You do now. Cross said it gently but firmly. Look, Sheriff Mercer, I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to help transition Red Hollow from frontier settlement to proper township. That means documentation, procedure, accountability. Sounds like a waste of time that could be spent actually protecting people. It's how civilization works. Cross leaned back in his chair. I've read reports about you. You're effective, respected, feared when necessary. But the territory's changing. The old ways, shoot first, bury the bodies, move on, they don't work anymore. We need law that's consistent, documented, defensible in court. Mercer stood abruptly. I've got rounds to make. He left before Cross could respond. Elena, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped inside. He'll come around, she told Cross. He just needs time. Does he have time? Cross asked. Because in 6 months, the governor's office will review Red Hollow's application for township status. If your husband can't demonstrate modern law enforcement practices, they'll replace him. Not because he's bad at his job, but because he refuses to do it their way. The warning settled like lead in Elena's stomach. I'll talk to him. She found Mercer at the clinic, aggressively reorganizing medical supplies that didn't need organizing. He's not wrong, Elena said without preamble. Whose side are you on? Ours. Always ours. She leaned against the doorframe. But being on our side means being honest. You can't sheriff the way you did 9 years ago. The territory's grown up. We have to grow with it. Or what? They'll fire me and bring in some bureaucrat who's never had to make a life or death decision in 2 seconds? Yes. Exactly that. Elena moved closer. You taught me to be brave about my writing. Let me teach you to be flexible about this. It doesn't make you weaker to adapt. It makes you smarter. Mercer's shoulders slumped. I don't know how to be what they want. Then learn. Work with Cross instead of against him. Let him teach you the paperwork and procedures. You can still be the sheriff Red Hollow needs, just with better documentation. He looked at her with tired eyes. When did you get so wise? I married a stubborn man. Had to develop wisdom in self-defense. That pulled a reluctant smile from him. Fair enough. The next months were tense. Mercer worked with Cross, learned the bureaucratic requirements he'd always ignored. It chafed him constantly. Every form filled out felt like surrender. Every procedure followed felt like weakness. But he persisted, driven by Elena's faith and his own stubborn refusal to be beaten by paperwork. Cross, to his credit, recognized Mercer's skills and deferred to his judgment in actual law enforcement. They developed a working relationship, if not quite a friendship. Cross handled administration. Mercer handled threats. It was imperfect, but functional. Red Hollow continued growing. New families arrived weekly, drawn by stories of opportunity and relative safety. The population pushed past 500, then 6. The single main street expanded to 3, and with growth came new problems, property disputes, competing businesses, the friction of too many people in too little space. Elena's school needed expansion again. She'd been putting it off, trying to make do with overcrowded classrooms and her overworked assistants. But the day she had to turn away a homesteader's daughter because there was literally no room, she knew something had to change. We need a new building, she told the town council. The current school can't handle enrollment. We're losing students because we have no space. Samuel Hale, Victoria's husband and head of the council, studied the proposal Elena had prepared. This budget is substantial. Where would the funding come from? Territorial education grants, local taxes, private donations? Elena had done her research. We're eligible for township development funds if we can prove the need. And you believe you can prove it? I have 47 students in a building designed for 30. I have children learning in the hallway because we've run out of classroom space. Yes, I can prove it. The council approved the funding, 4 votes to 1. Victoria Hale cast the only dissenting vote, but even she couldn't argue effectively against the documented need. Construction began that spring, a proper 2-room schoolhouse with space for 80 students and a small library. Elena threw herself into planning curriculum, training more teachers, building something that would outlast her. She was so focused on the school that she almost missed the signs her body was giving her. The exhaustion she attributed to overwork, the nausea she blamed on bad meat, the missed courses she assumed were stress. Sarah figured it out first, cornering Elena at the general store with knowing eyes. "When are you going to tell Colt?" Sarah asked. "Tell him what?" "That you're pregnant." Elena froze. I haven't... Elena, I've seen the signs. You're 3 months along at least, maybe 4. Sarah's smile was gentle. "Does he know?" "No, because I can't be..." But even as Elena protested, her hand moved unconsciously to her still flat stomach, and she knew Sarah was right. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The realization hit her in waves. Fear first. She'd seen too many frontier women die in childbirth, knew the risks intimately. Then wonder. A child, hers and Colt's, a tiny person they'd made together. Then practicality. How would she manage the school, the building project, her writing? "You need to tell him," Sarah said firmly. "Tonight." Elena nodded numbly. Tonight. She found Mercer at home that evening, reading medical journals by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, smiled that soft smile he reserved only for her. "How was the council meeting?" "Good. They approved the school funding." Elena sat beside him, heart pounding. "Colt, I need to tell you something." His smile faded, replaced by concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "I'm pregnant. About 3 months, Sarah thinks. Maybe 4. Mercer went absolutely still. His eyes dropped to where his hand rested on her belly, then back to her face. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." Elena tried to read his expression. Couldn't. "Say something." "I'm going to be a father." He said it like testing the words, seeing how they fit. "We're going to have a child." "Are you happy about it?" Elena asked carefully. They'd discussed children hypothetically, but never seriously, never with a timeline. Mercer's answer was to pull her into his arms, hold her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His hand returned to her stomach, gentle and reverent. Terrified, yes, but happy. So incredibly happy. Relief flooded through Elena. "I'm terrified too. Women die having babies out here. Good women, strong women." "You won't." Mercer's voice was fierce. "I'll make sure of it. We'll bring in the best doctor the territory has. Set up the clinic properly, whatever it takes to keep you safe. You can't control everything. Watch me try." He kissed her softly. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Elena echoed, and suddenly it felt real in a way it hadn't before. Real and terrifying and wonderful. The pregnancy progressed. Elena continued teaching as long as she could, but by her 7th month, the physical demands became too much. She trained her assistants to take over, spent more time writing and planning for the baby. Mercer became obsessively protective. He brought in a doctor from Denver, a woman named Dr. Catherine Mills, who specialized in frontier medicine and difficult births. He turned the spare room into a nursery, built a cradle with his own hands despite having no carpentry experience. He read every book on childbirth he could find, drove Elena slightly crazy with warnings about what she should and shouldn't do. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him, after he'd forbidden her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. "Humor me." His hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick. "I've lost too many people. I can't lose you." The vulnerability in his voice softened her irritation. "You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die. Promise me." "I promise to try my hardest to survive childbirth. How's that?" It wasn't the reassurance he wanted, but it was the honest one she could give. They both knew the risks. They both chose to hope anyway. The baby came early, 3 weeks before Dr. Mills expected, on a cold October night when Mercer was dealing with a dispute at the saloon. Sarah was with Elena when the pain started, immediately sent for the doctor and Mercer both. Labor was brutal. 18 hours of pain that redefined Elena's understanding of suffering. Dr. Mills was calm and competent, but even she looked worried as complications mounted. The baby was breech, wouldn't turn. Elena was bleeding more than normal. Time became a nightmare of pain and fear. Mercer arrived 10 hours in, took one look at Elena's pale face and the blood-soaked sheets, and went sheet white himself. "Out," Dr. Mills ordered. "You're no use to me panicking." "I'm not leaving her." "Then get yourself under control and help." Mills thrust clean towels at him. "We need to turn this baby or we'll lose them both." That snapped Mercer into doctor mode. He washed his hands, helped Mills manipulate Elena's belly, tried to coax the baby into position. Elena screamed beyond caring about dignity or strength. This was survival, raw and desperate. Finally, mercifully, the baby turned. And 20 minutes later, with a last exhausted push, Elena heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's first cry. "A girl!" Dr. Mills announced, placing the squalling infant on Elena's chest. Small but healthy. Elena looked down at the tiny, furious face and felt her heart crack open. This perfect, impossible person, this daughter she and Colt had made. Mercer was crying openly, his hand shaking as he touched the baby's small head. "She's beautiful." "She's angry," Elena said, but she was smiling through her own tears. "Takes after her father." They named her Catherine Sarah Mercer. Catherine for the doctor who'd saved them both. Sarah for the friend who'd been there through everything. She was small but fierce, with Colt's gray eyes and Elena's stubborn chin. The first months were exhausting. Catherine didn't sleep, hated being swaddled, and had opinions about everything despite being unable to speak. Elena walked the floor with her for hours, sang songs she half remembered from childhood, learned to function on fragments of sleep. Mercer was besotted. This hard man who'd killed without hesitation turned to absolute mush around his daughter. He'd hold her for hours, talk to her about everything and nothing, look at her like she was the most miraculous thing he'd ever seen. "You're going to spoil her," Elena warned, watching him rock Catherine through her latest screaming fit. "Good. She deserves to be spoiled." He kissed the baby's head. "After what you went through to get her here, she can have whatever she wants." Red Hollow embraced the baby with surprising enthusiasm. People who'd once looked at Elena with suspicion now stopped to admire Catherine, brought gifts, offered advice. Even Victoria Hale, who'd maintained her cold distance, softened slightly, admitting the baby was pretty. "Don't let it go to your head," Victoria said. "One baby doesn't make you special." "No," Elena agreed. "But she makes me happy. That's better than special." As Catherine grew, so did Red Hollow. The township designation came through, bringing infrastructure improvements and territorial funding. The new school opened, beautiful and spacious, with a proper library funded by Elena's writing income. Mercer adjusted to working with territorial oversight, even came to appreciate having resources he'd lacked before. Years passed in a blur of growth and change. Catherine learned to walk, then talk, then question everything with relentless curiosity. More children followed, Thomas 2 years after Catherine, then Margaret 3 years after that. The small house at the edge of town became cramped, so they built a larger one with room for their growing family. Elena continued teaching and writing, balancing motherhood with her work. Some days were harder than others, guilt pulling her in different directions. But Mercer helped, genuinely partnered with her in raising their children and managing the household. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still struggled with stubbornness and pride. But it was real. Daniel Cross eventually moved on to another assignment, but not before training his replacement and leaving Red Hollow with functioning law enforcement infrastructure. Mercer remained sheriff, now with 3 deputies and actual written procedures. He grumbled about paperwork, but admitted privately to Elena that having help meant he could focus on what mattered. Sarah and James had children too. The town grew past 1,000 residents. A railroad spur was planned, promising to connect Red Hollow to the wider territory. The wild frontier Elena had arrived in was becoming civilized, for better and worse. On their 10th anniversary, Mercer took Elena riding into the canyon where he'd first saved her from the stagecoach bandits. She hadn't been back since that terrifying day, had avoided it deliberately. "Why here?" she asked as they dismounted. "Because this is where it started." Mercer took her hand, led her to the spot where the stagecoach had stopped. 10 years ago, I killed 5 men here. Terrified you. changed both our lives. Elena looked around at the familiar rocks, the empty space where violence had erupted. I was so angry that day, so certain you were destroying my life. I was. Just not at the way you thought. He turned to face her. I've never apologized for how I brought you here, for the manipulation, the control, the way I took your choice. Colt, let me finish. His voice was rough. What I did was wrong. I know that. Debt or no debt, contract or not, forcing you into marriage was wrong. You deserved better, deserved choice. You gave me choice eventually, Elena reminded him. The money, the offer to leave, you gave it back, years too late. He cupped her face gently. I'm sorry, Elena, for all of it, for bringing you here against your will, for making you suffer before you could find happiness, for being too proud and stubborn to admit I was wrong. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You know what the strange thing is? I don't regret it, any of it. The anger, the fear, the forced marriage, it all led here. To this life, these children, this love, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not even for the life you dreamed of in Philadelphia? Especially not that. She smiled through tears. That life would have killed me slowly. This one made me live. Mercer kissed her, soft and sweet. I love you. More now than when we started. More tomorrow than today. That's quite a promise. I'm good at keeping promises. He pulled back, reached into his pocket. I have something for you. He handed her a small leather journal, worn but beautiful. Elena opened it, found the first page filled with Mercer's careful handwriting. I've been writing, he said, almost shy. About us. About how we met, how you changed everything. Thought maybe someday our children should know the whole story. The good and the bad. Elena paged through entries spanning years, Mercer's perspective on their marriage, his thoughts, his fears, his growing love. It was raw and honest and absolutely him. This is beautiful, she said. It's the truth. He took her hand. We didn't start perfect. We started broken and angry and forced together, but we became something good anyway. I wanted them to know that love doesn't have to start easy to end up strong. Elena closed the journal, held it to her chest. Our children are going to think we're ridiculous. Probably, but they'll know we chose each other, eventually. That has to count for something. They stood in the canyon where violence had brought them together, looking at the life they'd built from that terrible beginning. 3 children, a thriving town, careers they loved, a partnership that had survived everything. Do you remember what you told me that first night? Elena asked. In the house? After the wedding? I told you a lot of things. You said I'd share your name and your house, but what happened beyond that depended on whether I ever decided I wanted you. Elena turned to face him fully. I want you, Colt Mercer. 10 years in and I still want you. Every stubborn, complicated, beautiful piece of you. His arms came around her, pulled her close. Good. Because you're stuck with me now. Worst decision I ever made, Elena said against his chest. Best, he corrected. We're both right. They rode back to Red Hollow as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and red. Their children would be waiting, Catherine probably reading, Thomas likely covered in mud from whatever adventure he'd invented, Margaret demanding her father tell her stories about criminals he'd caught. Their life was loud and chaotic and imperfect, but it was theirs, built from nothing by 2 stubborn people who'd fought their way to love. Elena thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach a decade ago, terrified, angry, certain her life was ending. If she could go back and tell that woman the truth, what would she say? That the journey would be brutal but worth it. That love earned through hardship lasted longer than love given freely. That sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things we never knew we needed. That home isn't where you start, it's where you fight to stay. Red Hollow had given Elena a future when she'd lost her past. Colt had given her a partnership when she'd expected a prison. And together they'd built something stronger than either could have managed alone. Not a perfect life, but a real one, a chosen one, a life that mattered. And in the end, that was everything. Years would continue passing. Their children would grow, probably leave for bigger opportunities, maybe return. Red Hollow would keep evolving, becoming something neither Elena nor Colt quite recognized from their early days. They'd grow old together, accumulate more scars, physical and emotional, and love each other through all of it, because that's what they'd learned. Through fire and violence and stubborn persistence, love wasn't about smooth paths or perfect beginnings. It was about choosing each other through the rough parts, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about understanding that sometimes the harshest journeys led to the only home the heart was ever meant to find. And as they rode into Red Hollow together, hand in hand, Elena understood the final truth her father had known when he'd made that terrible contract. He hadn't sold her into slavery. He'd given her a chance at freedom she'd never have found on her own. It had taken a decade to understand. But now, finally, she did. And she was grateful.